Inside the world of the game, two men faced each other on the battlefield. The villain carried himself with confidence, convinced that his opponent, the protagonist, had no chance of defeating him. The protagonist appeared uneasy and gave no response. The referee then signaled the start of the battle. The villain made the first move, charging forward without hesitation. As he advanced, he intended for Lilith to witness how the one who defied him would be humiliated before everyone. From behind, Lilith supported him with visible excitement. Yet after some time, the outcome had already reversed. The villain was lying on the ground, completely defeated. He was Weiss Vincent, widely known as the villainous noble. After losing to the protagonist Alan, he lost everything from that moment onward. In the end, he was reduced to a mere shield for the Demon King, and his life came to an end. Not long after, the player who had been controlling the game also died. Elsewhere, inside a house, a maid knelt on the floor, crying. Behind her stood Weiss, preparing to punish her. Then, in an instant, his expression shifted. Something had changed, and confusion took over him. Weiss no longer understood who she was or where he was. His thoughts became disoriented as he questioned what was happening. He could not recognize the maid before him, nor the place surrounding him. His stance faltered in disbelief. Only moments ago, he had been playing a game. Yet before he realized it, a woman was tied up right in front of him. The maid, noticing his strange behavior, questioned him and addressed him by name, calling him Weiss. Weiss took notice of her appearance, feeling as though he had seen her somewhere before. The fact that she called him Weiss deepened his confusion. He turned toward a mirror and examined himself. The realization struck him. He had become the villainous and abusive noble, Weiss. There was no mistake. This was the villainous character from the school fantasy game, Noblesse Oblige, Weiss Vincent, a game he had completed multiple times. Weiss was the game's antagonist, a noble who stood in the way of the protagonist Alan during the school arc. He was known as the lowest kind of scum, someone who abused his authority to torment the weak without restraint. After being thoroughly defeated by the protagonist, Weiss lost everything and eventually became a servant of the Demon King. In the end, he was used as nothing more than a shield and died. Returning to the present, he began to wonder if the girl tied before him was the maid Lilith Scarlet. Thinking back, Weiss remembered that this version of himself had a habit of tormenting Lilith. A sense of discomfort rose within him as he recognized how cruel that behavior was, especially towards someone so gentle in appearance. He quickly moved to untie her. However, he suddenly hesitated. If his behavior changed too abruptly, it might raise suspicion. The maid watched him in disbelief as he loosened her restraints. Unable to simply leave her like that, he ultimately decided to stop for the day. Weiss noticed a bruise on Lilith's neck. He saw her trembling in fear, and after a moment of hesitation, he decided to try something. He attempted to heal her. The bruise on her neck disappeared instantly. He had succeeded. This was healing magic, something the developers had kept hidden, a skill that had been usable from the very beginning. He recalled learning about it from a strategy book and felt relieved that he had come across that information. He then turned toward Lilith, making it clear that she should not misunderstand his actions. He only wanted to practice healing and had not done it for her sake. For a brief moment, Lilith remained silent. Then her expression softened, and she thanked him with visible relief. She also mentioned that she had not known he was capable of using healing magic. Weiss found himself unsettled. Even though everything was originally his fault, she still expressed gratitude. It made him wonder if Weiss had pushed her so far that she had become disobedient. He called out to Lilith and offered a sincere apology for everything, making it clear that he would not repeat such actions again. Lilith appeared confused by his sudden change. Later, at the dining table, Zevis Aldine, the butler of the Vincent family, served Weiss his meal. Zevis showed signs of unease and confusion, as Weiss would normally criticize the food and throw the plate to the floor. Weiss called out to him by name. Then, in a serious manner, he admitted that he had been wrong until now for treating the food so carelessly. He also acknowledged that the seasoning was perfect today as well. Zevis fell silent for a moment before reacting with visible excitement, deeply moved by the unexpected words. He expressed how honored he felt. The staff around them praised Weiss, calling him wonderful. Weiss observed their reactions and found it strange. They seemed to believe that Weiss had simply matured, unable to notice that he had become a completely different person inside. He concluded that the previous Weiss must have been far worse than he had imagined. From that point on, he resolved that he would no longer make those girls suffer. The first thing he chose to do was get rid of his baton. He stepped outside and threw it away. Even then, he felt that he still needed to change further. As a noble, Weiss was expected to attend a prestigious academy at the age of 15. The entrance exam for that school was only 2 years away. In the original story, after losing to the protagonist in a combat test, Weiss's reputation declined, and negative opinions about him began to spread. However, that defeat had not happened yet. The future might still be different. Realizing this, Weiss understood that he had no choice but to act. After discarding his baton, he solidified his resolve. Even if it required all his strength, he would avoid the path that led to his ruin. Outside, Weiss was drenched in sweat, exhausted from training as he took a moment to rest. While catching his breath, someone called out to him, questioning whether he was truly taking his training seriously. The one who approached him was Milk Avidas, an S-rank adventurer. Weiss affirmed that he was indeed taking it seriously. However, he admitted that his body could no longer move and asked for a short break. Milk acknowledged his condition and allowed him to rest properly, but she added that this would only be acceptable if he was willing to be labeled a loser right after enrolling. Her words stirred something within him. Weiss formed a strained smile and forced himself back on his feet, continuing his training. He had used his family's connections to request an exceptional mentor. Milk Avidas originally appeared near the end of the game and was regarded as a swordsman closest to being the strongest in the royal capital. He had made it clear that, despite being a noble, he wanted to be trained without mercy. Her methods were harsh, and her presence carried an intimidating edge. During his training, Lilith quietly approached from behind and handed him the item he had requested. She looked at the writing on it and questioned its meaning. Weiss explained that it meant a resolve to give everything, even to the point of death. The game, noblesse oblige, was known as a so-called death game, an extremely difficult game that required repeated attempts to clear. Weiss understood that neglecting preparation would lead to immediate expulsion or even death. Not a single moment could be wasted. Yet he had never properly trained his body before, not even in his previous life. The process was exhausting, but improving basic physical strength was essential for mastering both swordsmanship and magic. He began each day by practicing forms, then ran continuously to build stamina, followed by intense muscle training. From morning until night, he repeated the same routine over and over again. As night fell, Zevis served the dinner that Weiss had specifically requested, a meal rich in protein. Weiss felt apologetic for causing trouble despite Zevis already being busy. 2 weeks had passed since the training began. Injuries could be treated with recovery magic, but proper physical training also required a careful diet. Thanks to Zevis's steady support, Weiss was able to endure even a certain level of overexertion. Then more time passed. 3 weeks into the training, it had become so intense that each day felt as long as a month. Yet before he noticed, the sun would already be setting. Having finally adjusted to the physical demands, Weiss decided it was time to call for a magic instructor. Even so, the strict training under Milk had already worn him down. He found himself hoping that the magic teacher would be more gentle. At that moment, Zevis informed him that the magic teacher had arrived and was ready to enter. Weiss wondered what kind of teacher would appear before him. When the teacher arrived, she greeted him, then casually removed her magic hat. She introduced herself as Milk Avidas. At that moment, Weiss dropped to his knees in shock, realizing it was her once again. Milk explained that she was not only a master of swordsmanship but also skilled in magic. She greeted him as if meeting him again after some time. Weiss questioned the point of her appearing in the same role once more. At the same time, Weiss quietly conveyed to Zevis that he had specifically asked for a kind teacher. Zevis responded by explaining that Milk was a genius magic swordsman, capable of handling 2 of the 4 great magic attributes. Milk then asked whether Weiss truly wanted her to be gentle. He was startled that she had overheard them despite their hushed exchange. She assured him that she would teach him magic gently and told him to leave everything to her, as she considered herself a professional. The scene shifted to the start of magic training. Milk pushed him intensely, urging him not to close his eyes and to channel more magic power. The training quickly became overwhelming. Weiss struggled under the pressure, questioning where her promised gentleness had gone. To him, it felt even harsher than sword training. Milk continued to push him, insisting that he endure for another 2 hours. She explained that to use magic, one needed mana, and the only way to increase it was through consistent training. She instructed him to repeat this process until he collapsed from exhaustion. Weiss reacted in disbelief at the demand. From that point onward, along with basic magic training, practical training using wooden swords was also added to his routine. During one session, Milk struck his back, causing him to fall. She pointed out that he still had too many openings. Lilith then approached and used healing magic to restore his body. Milk stated that she would also support him with healing, encouraging him to continue doing his best. Weiss felt grateful for the support. Still, something about the situation felt strange to him. He questioned why someone as unmotivated as his past self was now able to work so hard. In his previous life, he had been like a lifeless shell, avoiding responsibilities, giving up easily, and surrendering without resistance. He could not understand what had changed between then and now that allowed him to persist with such effort. 2 months passed since the training began. Weiss sat down to rest when Milk approached and lightly patted his head. She acknowledged that he had managed to achieve it within 2 hours, recognizing it as a clear sign of improvement. Weiss pointed out whether patting his head was what his teacher meant by teaching him gently. Milk affirmed it without hesitation and explained that every time he achieved a goal, she would reward him with a pat. Weiss felt that the balance between reward and punishment seemed uneven. Milk dismissed that thought, insisting it was not the case. He remained puzzled by her response. At that moment, Lilith arrived and brought lunch for Weiss. Milk then clarified that she was only the one handling the harsh side of training. Weiss had likely already received enough encouragement from others. She reminded him not to overlook those who played the role of support, the ones who allowed him to keep going. At that point, Weiss came to a realization. He understood that the reason he was able to keep pushing forward was because of the people around him. Lilith remained by his side, always supporting him. Zevis took care of his meals and helped him maintain his condition. Milk, despite her strictness, carried the burden of pushing him forward for his own growth. Without their combined efforts, he would not have reached this point. Both the previous Weiss and his past self had only thought about themselves, which was why no one had supported them and no one had corrected them. What he truly needed was a balance of kindness and strictness. From that moment on, he no longer wanted to live only for himself. Until now, his goal had been simple. He did not want to die and did not want to fall into ruin, all for his own sake. But that began to change. He did not want to make Lilith and the others who had supported him feel disappointed. He wanted to show them a version of himself they could be proud of. For both himself and those around him, Weiss resolved to avoid the path that would lead to his destruction. Soon after, training resumed once again. Milk raised the next objective, pushing him toward enduring 4 hours of training, intent on driving him to his limits. Somewhere within the town, Weiss walked alongside Milk and Lilith. As they moved together, he found himself thinking that it felt like a pleasant outing, being accompanied by two girls with such striking presence. This place was League Belt Town, known in the game as the very first town the protagonist would arrive at. While walking nearby, they came across the sound of an argument, voices raised over accusations of cheating. Weiss observed the scene of two men fighting and thought that the town's security remained as poor as ever. He then turned his attention to Milk, wondering who his opponent would be. It had already been 3 months since Weiss began his training. Now that the timing seemed right, he had been assigned a practical test within this city. He began to question whether the test involved real combat, perhaps picking a fight with some random thug. As that thought crossed his mind, he noticed the unusual smile on Milk's face, which left him puzzled. Milk reassured him in her own way, implying that she intended to choose the most suitable opponent for him, encouraging him to look forward to it. Behind him, Lilith showed her support. Even so, Weiss could not relax. A sense of unease lingered as sweat formed on his skin. Nearby, a group of men noticed their presence and began making crude remarks, their attention drawn to the girls accompanying Weiss. One of them expressed particular interest in Lilith's appearance. Their voices carried clearly enough for Weiss and Lilith to hear, yet neither of them reacted outwardly. Weiss thought to himself that those men should be more careful with their words, knowing that Milk was fully capable of dealing with them in an instant. League Belt Town was known as one of the worst places, a gathering ground for thugs and criminals. Regardless of Milk's presence, Weiss felt that he had to protect Lilith no matter what. His hand tightened into a fist, while Lilith quietly regarded the men as nothing more than a nuisance. Weiss remained uneasy. Milk told Lilith to ignore them, making it clear they were not worth attention. Lilith agreed without hesitation. As Weiss looked at her, he felt as though she was giving off a strong and chilling presence. For a moment, he questioned whether it was only his imagination. Inside the Adventurers Guild, 3 men approached a young boy and pressured him to step outside. The boy appeared anxious. From nearby, Weiss recognized the men as the Boudin brothers, the ones he was meant to face. Looking out through a window, Milk began assessing the situation. The brothers were involved in countless crimes: rape, robbery, kidnapping, murder, and slave trading. Their actions had been ignored for a long time through bribery, but the corrupt military police who had accepted those bribes had already been arrested. Now, all that remained was to deal with the 3 brothers themselves. They were extreme criminals, so there was no need for restraint. For Weiss, they were the perfect opponents for a real battle. Weiss showed a faint smile and accepted the idea, intending to head back afterward. However, as he tried to step away, Milk stopped him and forced him to listen. She reminded him of his earlier determination. Even so, Weiss still lacked real combat experience. She explained that real combat was something he would eventually have to face, so it was better to overcome it now. Milk continued by pointing out that if he let this opportunity pass, there was no guarantee she would be there to watch over him in his next real battle. He might end up facing it alone. There were many who had lost their lives simply because they lacked experience. She emphasized that she was still with him now, and if the situation became dangerous, she would step in to help. She pushed him toward facing his first real combat and urged him to approach it with confidence. Weiss thought of Milk as someone reliable. Yet, moments later, he realized he could no longer find her. Before he knew it, he was already walking alongside the Boudin brothers. He had been tricked. Milk had disappeared along with Lilith. Weiss had picked a fight with the Boudin brothers under the assumption that she would be backing him up. One of the brothers led him toward an alley. Weiss felt uneasy, unsure of what to do next. There was no way he could back down now simply because of fear. He had no choice but to steady himself. His objective was to disable one of them by cutting off an arm. There was no need to kill, but the situation was 3 against 1, and he was not even certain he could win in a fair fight. Despite their rough appearance, those men were far from weak and possessed real skill. Once dragged into the alley, a fight would begin whether he wanted it or not. Weiss needed to form a plan before that happened. As he thought about it, he recalled what Milk had told him earlier. He had been assured that if he followed her guidance, he would be fine. Not far away, Milk and Lilith observed Weiss walking with the men. Lilith felt that Milk's actions were too harsh, deceiving Weiss in such a way. Milk dismissed the concern, believing that without pushing him like this, Weiss would not become motivated enough. She further explained that training based on the assumption that someone would come to help was not real training at all. Already having had something to drink, Milk added that there was no need to worry, and that if things truly became dangerous, she would likely step in. Meanwhile, behind them, another group of men recognized Milk and Lilith as the same ones they had seen earlier in town. Lilith turned her gaze toward them. The men began to surround them, their attention fixed on her appearance, commenting on her beauty while others agreed, noting that the timing seemed too convenient. The group of men introduced themselves as the band of thieves who controlled the area. One of them casually mentioned that they were short on girls to spend time with that night. Behind them, 3 girls could be seen sitting with their hands tied. Suddenly, blood splattered. The 2 Boudin brothers turned around, only to see their other brother with his arm cut off. This was exactly what Milk had instructed Weiss before he picked the fight, to move first. She had told him that the most important factor in battle was catching the opponent off guard. The first strike, delivered before the enemy could react, surpassed any other attack. Even a master of magic could fall if struck before preparing a barrier. Likewise, even a master of martial arts could be defeated if their neck was broken before they could brace themselves. The lesson was clear: act before the opponent does. Enraged, the remaining 2 brothers moved to surround Weiss. In response, Weiss struck the one behind him with a kick. As the fight unfolded, Weiss reflected on himself. He had always delayed making decisions, believing that his future self would somehow handle everything. But time alone would not resolve anything. If something needed to be done, then decisions had to be made immediately. From that point forward, he resolved to act without hesitation. He committed himself to change, leaving behind the lazy version of who he once was. After an intense exchange, Weiss defeated the Boudin brothers. He had succeeded. In his thoughts, he realized that if he had followed them deeper into the alley, they would have strengthened themselves with mana and reinforced their defenses. If all 3 had entered combat readiness at the same time, he would have had no chance of winning. His victory came from striking before they could react. Nearby, he heard Milk's evaluation. She acknowledged his performance but considered it worthy of only 70 points. In her view, a more proactive approach would have been to sever an arm inside the Adventurers Guild itself. Lilith, however, responded differently. She showed her support for Weiss and regarded his efforts as deserving of full marks. Weiss then noticed blood on Lilith's clothes. When he questioned it, she concealed the stain and dismissed it as nothing. Later, news spread through the town. A newspaper reported that more than 20 members of the notorious band of thieves had been arrested. Although there were no deaths, the criminals had been beaten to the point where they could no longer speak. Among those captured were the infamous Boudin brothers, with Weiss Vincent credited for his cooperation. The report was read by an unknown girl, who became curious about the identity of Weiss. Afterward, the Vincent family received a letter of gratitude along with a monetary reward. Over time, the growth of Weiss became clearly noticeable. 1 year and 6 months had passed since his training began. Each day continued with intense training. Running out of stamina or collapsing from mana exhaustion were things that no longer happened. In addition, Weiss had developed the ability to sense the presence of enemies even through walls. He could also feel the flow of mana within his body and recognized that he had improved significantly. One evening, while Weiss was eating dinner, Zevis approached him and asked about his progress, wondering if his magic training was going smoothly. Weiss confirmed that everything was going well. He reflected on how difficult Milk's strict training had been. There were 4 main elements of magic: fire, water, wind, and earth, and training all of them equally was an extreme challenge. Weiss demonstrated his ability to control all 4 elements. Zevis, watching from behind, was visibly impressed. Weiss remarked that Milk's methods were harsh, even more so than the Boudin brothers he had once defeated. Zevis responded by explaining that Milk likely pushed him so hard because Weiss possessed extraordinary talent. Normally, a person could only use 1 element of magic. Even someone like Milk, an S-rank adventurer, could only handle 2 elements. Yet Weiss was capable of using all four, which was exceptionally rare. Zevis reflected that if Weiss had remained lazy, such talent would have never surfaced. In the past, he had been surprised by Weiss's carelessness, but he never expected him to continue working diligently without giving up until reaching his current level. As that thought settled, Zevis regarded him with newfound admiration. However, Weiss had already left his seat. Outside, Weiss was apologizing while asking not to be struck. Lilith stepped in, stopping Milk just before she could hit Weiss's nose with a wooden sword. Milk questioned whether Weiss had been practicing magic on his own without her guidance. Weiss admitted it through his actions, showing that he had indeed been training in secret. Milk then told him to demonstrate what he had achieved. Weiss stood up and released two elements into his hands. As she observed, Milk recognized them as light and dark elements. In addition to the four standard elements, Weiss had also gained the ability to use these special attributes. She questioned why he had kept this hidden. Weiss revealed that he had wanted to show it to her only after it was fully complete, as what he had now was still unfinished. Milk repeated her question, focusing on the word incomplete. Weiss confirmed it, admitting that he had not fully mastered it yet, though he could already use it to some extent. By combining light and dark magic, he had created something of his own, an original form of magic. Now that both Milk and Lilith were watching, he decided it was the moment to bring it closer to completion. He demonstrated the result of a year and a half of effort. As they watched, both Milk and Lilith were left in shock. Time passed and day turned into night. Inside a residence, a gathering was being held. People conversed around the room while Weiss let out a quiet yawn. Lilith noticed and wondered if he had stayed up late the previous night. Weiss questioned whether yawning was inappropriate for such an occasion. Lilith then considered whether his fatigue was from the previous day, but Weiss had already recovered by then. After that, Weiss successfully completed his original magic. The light element formed healing magic known as Healing Light, while the dark element created a curse-based poison magic called Dark Haze. By combining both, he developed a new technique called Dark Heal. This magic allowed him to automatically heal all allies within a certain range while continuously inflicting curse damage on enemies it recognized. Although he managed to complete this technique, the cost in mana was overwhelming, leaving Weiss completely exhausted afterward. In his thoughts, he realized that he still needed further training to increase his mana capacity. At that moment, Lilith came up with an idea to wake him up and decided to fetch some strong alcohol. She quickly ran off, her movements swift and precise, almost like that of an assassin. Weiss noticed this and recalled hearing about hidden guards within the Vincent family's background. For a brief moment, he considered the possibility that Lilith might be one of them, but he dismissed the thought. Nearby, a woman approached him and called his name. Standing before him was a strikingly beautiful woman. Weiss immediately recognized her as Cynthia, the daughter of Countess Violetta. Her shimmering hair and vivid red eyes made her stand out effortlessly. By anyone's standards, she was undeniably beautiful. She was the main heroine of the game, Cynthia Violetta. She greeted him as if it had been a long time since they last met. As she looked at him, she questioned his condition, noting his unusual reaction. Weiss felt his body tense. In the story, he had been disliked by nearly every character, but among them, Cynthia held the deepest hatred toward him. She was also the one responsible for his death. Weiss reflected on the situation. As a member of the Vincent family, he had reluctantly shown his face at this gathering. He began to regret attending an event filled with such individuals. He had never expected to encounter Cynthia before even enrolling in the academy. Still, he tried to steady himself. This was before enrollment. He had not yet done anything that would cause Cynthia to hate him. Suddenly, Weiss recalled a memory from the previous Weiss as if it were happening in real time. He saw Cynthia before him and tried to understand what was going on, but his memories were unclear. Then his eyes widened as the scene unfolded. The former Weiss had forced Cynthia onto a bed and covered her mouth with his hand. Cynthia had never forgotten what happened back then. Using his status, Weiss had forcefully invited her into his room and attempted to defile her with his actions. As Weiss processed the memory, Cynthia regarded him with clear contempt, seeing him as nothing more than a disgraceful noble. She questioned how he could attend the gathering so openly after what he had done. In Weiss's mind, the situation felt like the worst possible outcome. He wondered what the previous Weiss had done to leave him in such a position. Cynthia's hatred toward him was so strong that it felt overwhelming. Faced with this, Weiss understood that there was only one thing he could do. He bowed his head and sincerely apologized. He acknowledged that everything had been his fault and admitted that his actions were unworthy of a noble. He truly regretted what had happened. He knew that forgiveness was unlikely, yet he also believed that Cynthia was not someone who would continue to condemn a person who showed genuine remorse. As Cynthia watched him lower his head, she seemed to come to an understanding. She had never expected Weiss to humble himself like that in front of others. A faint smile appeared on her face. Weiss sensed that even if only slightly, her anger had eased. If this could reduce the chances of his downfall, then he would be grateful. For now, this was all he could do. He began to think that he should find the right moment to leave. There was also a part of him that wanted to get closer to Cynthia, someone he had admired in the original story. However, he believed that they were like opposites, light and dark, never meant to cross paths. Like someone who flew too close to the sun, he felt that a disgraced noble like himself approaching someone as refined as Cynthia would only lead to a bad outcome. With that in mind, he prepared to withdraw. Then, without warning, Cynthia reached out and took his hand. Their eyes met. Nearby, Lilith witnessed the moment and was surprised by what she saw. Cynthia then invited him to dance. Both Weiss and Lilith were taken aback. As the music continued, Cynthia began to dance in front of Weiss, moving with elegance as she drew his attention toward her presence. After some time, Weiss and Cynthia were seated together, sharing tea in a calm setting. Cynthia observed that the weather was pleasant, with birds chirping softly. Weiss echoed her words, agreeing in a somewhat awkward manner. As the moment continued, Weiss found himself wondering why Cynthia was at his residence. His thoughts traced back to how everything had started that night. It was when Cynthia had asked him to dance. By chance, Weiss had encountered the heroine of the story, Cynthia, and for reasons he could not fully understand, he had been invited to a formal dance with her. Noticing his confusion, Cynthia made it clear that she was aware of his recent changes. It seemed that she had learned about his daily training in preparation for entering the academy, likely through rumors circulating among the nobles. As they danced, Cynthia brought up the incident from that day, referencing how Weiss claimed to remember little of it. Weiss recalled the moment involving the attempted assault and acknowledged it, though he admitted to himself that he still did not know how to properly make amends. Then, as they drew closer during the dance, Cynthia brought up something unexpected. She questioned whether he had also forgotten the words he had once said to her. Weiss was left confused by the implication. Before he could fully process it, the dance came to an end, and the surrounding crowd responded with applause. Cynthia then took her leave, parting ways after the moment. That brief encounter left a lasting impression on Weiss, but it did not end there. Not long after, Weiss received a letter at his residence. It was from his father, Agito Vincent. The message informed him of a planned dinner with Cynthia, to be held at his own home. Weiss was caught off guard, unable to fully grasp what it meant, especially since it was scheduled for that very day. Before he could gather his thoughts, Cynthia had already arrived outside. Weiss felt a growing sense of unease. As preparations were made to receive her, the staff quickly moved into action. Behind him, Lilith noticed something on the table. The letter from Weiss's father had another document tucked inside it. That moment brought Weiss and Cynthia back to the present. In his mind, Weiss found himself cursing his father, unable to understand what he had been thinking. Although Weiss felt genuinely pleased to be sharing tea with Cynthia, someone he had come to like, he knew he could not allow himself to get too close to her. In the original story, Cynthia was meant to end up with the protagonist, Alan. If Weiss grew closer to her, those events might never happen. If the future changed too much, he would no longer be able to act according to the scenario he relied on. The realization stirred frustration within him. Even his victory over Alan during the exam could already have influenced the future. But taking the main heroine away entirely would disrupt everything that followed. Weiss understood that both outcomes were dangerous. Being disliked would lead him toward ruin, but being liked could also bring unexpected consequences. He believed he had to maintain a careful balance, keeping the perfect distance. Lost in these thoughts, he was brought back when Cynthia spoke to him. She reminded him of something he had once said, that he had fallen for her at first sight, and questioned whether he had forgotten it as well. Weiss's expression stiffened. Cynthia reflected on that moment, recalling how sudden and somewhat arrogant it had sounded, which had left her dissatisfied at the time. However, seeing his current sincerity, she no longer held the same impression. Weiss struggled to process her words. In his mind, Cynthia appeared as someone dignified and refined, yet unexpectedly gentle. That contrast unsettled him. Just as he had been thinking that it would be dangerous if she grew fond of him, this was happening. He remembered how, in the original story, Cynthia's feelings for the protagonist developed at an unusually fast pace. While she was kind-hearted, once she truly fell for someone, her devotion became absolute. That thought made Weiss uneasy. He concluded that he needed to find a way to lower her growing affection. Yet Cynthia continued to look at him with admiration, even finding his quiet demeanor appealing. Weiss realized that things were not going as he intended. Her interest in him was increasing on its own. In the midst of this, Weiss let out an awkward sound without meaning to. Behind him, Lilith quietly served more tea. Weiss immediately felt embarrassed, realizing how awkward it must have seemed. At the same time, he considered that it might have helped his situation, thinking that such an unrefined moment could lessen Cynthia's interest. However, Cynthia's reaction remained unchanged. She continued to look at him with the same admiration, even finding the moment endearing. Weiss felt that the situation was becoming difficult to control and knew he had to act quickly. Lilith remained silent, observing everything. As Cynthia brought up a matter related to something Weiss's father had mentioned earlier that day, Weiss realized that he had no knowledge of it. Cynthia then spoke about the matter of their engagement. It became clear that the dinner that day had been arranged as a formal introduction between them. The decision had been made by their parents without their involvement. However, after spending time with Weiss, Cynthia had also come to accept the arrangement. Elsewhere, Weiss's father reflected on the situation with satisfaction, remarking on his troublesome son. Surrounded by his guards, he continued working on something with enthusiasm. He noted that Weiss had inherited his good looks but lacked confidence in certain matters. Now that Weiss had finally danced with the well-known Cynthia, he had taken swift action to secure their engagement without hesitation, believing it would bring his son happiness. One of his guards questioned whether this had been done with Weiss's approval. His father dismissed the concern, insisting that as Weiss's parent, he could understand his son's desires without needing to ask. He then urged his guard to stop questioning him and instead assist with the work they were doing. Back at Weiss's residence, as Cynthia departed, Weiss's expression hardened. What had been arranged was not a simple tea gathering, but an engagement. While arranged marriages were common among noble families, this was not a political arrangement. Instead, it seemed that his father had acted purely on the belief that it would make him happy. In the original story, his father had barely appeared and rarely returned home, leaving Weiss with little understanding of what kind of person he was. Now, Weiss realized that his father embodied the nature of an overly indulgent parent. At that moment, he felt he had finally understood one of the main reasons why the former Weiss had turned into a villain. After Cynthia left, Weiss turned toward Lilith and saw that she was in tears. The sight caught him off guard. Lilith, unable to hide her feelings, urged him to be happy with Cynthia before running off. Weiss briefly noticed how fast she moved but set that thought aside, focusing instead on her condition. At the gate, Milk was waiting. She stated that the task for the day was to chase after Lilith. She then asked whether Weiss understood why Lilith had been crying. Milk explained that Lilith had been supporting Weiss for a year and a half, only for someone else to suddenly appear and take his place by his side. Even if the engagement had not been Weiss's own decision, Milk made it clear that he could not ignore the fact that Lilith had been hurt by it. Milk gave Weiss a clear order to bring Lilith back to the mansion. She made it known that failure would not be tolerated. Without hesitation, Weiss accepted and immediately ran after Lilith. As he chased her, a realization formed in his mind. Milk was right. Lilith had always been by his side. There was no way she would not be shaken by the sudden engagement. On top of that, he knew he owed her more than he could easily repay. Ahead of him, Lilith noticed that Weiss was pursuing her. Weiss reflected on everything she had done for him. Without her support, he would have remained the same lazy person he once was. He understood that the reason he had been able to push himself forward was because of her presence. Just as he was about to catch up, Lilith suddenly moved away with unexpected speed, creating distance between them again. She made it clear that she did not want him to follow her. Weiss was stunned. Even though he was running with everything he had, he could not close the gap. He could not understand why he was unable to catch up to her. The chase continued, leading them through the forest and toward a river. Weiss tried to get her to stop and listen, wanting at least a moment to speak. Lilith, however, tried to distance herself emotionally, accepting the situation as something inevitable. To her, it was simply the reality of her position. Weiss rejected that idea. To him, she was not just someone in that role. She was someone important to him. He made it clear that the engagement had been decided entirely by his father, not by his own will. Frustration surfaced as he expressed this. Then he brought up another matter, questioning whether Lilith understood how the servant system worked within the Noble Academy. At Noblesse Magic Academy, where Weiss was set to enroll, only high-ranking nobles were permitted to bring one servant as an exception. Weiss declared his intention to take Lilith with him, as she was the person he trusted the most. Lilith was moved by his words. She then questioned whether Weiss truly needed her by his side. Weiss, still catching his breath from the chase, made it clear that this was exactly why he had been running after her. Lilith then wondered whether he would continue chasing her indefinitely. Weiss, now struggling to breathe, felt his strength fading, sensing that he might lose consciousness. Even so, he affirmed that he would continue. At that moment, Lilith slowed her pace. She seemed to understand his resolve. Accepting it, she prepared to respond, beginning to express her willingness to remain by his side. Before anything more could be said, Weiss lost his footing and fell from a cliff, his consciousness fading. Without hesitation, Lilith rushed forward and leaped after him. In midair, she managed to catch him. Holding him close, she steadied his fall, determined to protect him. She resolved to remain by his side and accepted the bond that had formed between them, deciding that what had happened between them would remain a secret. As they descended, Weiss regained awareness. Their situation settled into a quiet understanding between them. They fell into the water below. And so, Weiss found himself engaged to Cynthia while also becoming secretly involved with Lilith. Elsewhere, the protagonist continued his intense training, preparing himself fully for what lay ahead. The other day, many unexpected events unfolded, and before he could fully understand it, Weiss found himself engaged to Cynthia while also becoming a secret lover to Lilith. The situation was so absurd that Weiss struggled to process it. In his thoughts, he directed his frustration toward his father, blaming him for making everything unnecessarily complicated. He was certain that once his father returned from his diplomatic duties, there would be many complaints waiting for him. Meanwhile, during training, Milk announced that basic training would come to an end and that they would move on to practical sparring. She asked Cynthia and Lilith whether they had any experience with sparring. Both of them confirmed that they had. Weiss found it hard to believe that Lilith had already undergone such training. As if things were not already complicated enough, there was another development. Both Lilith and Cynthia had joined the training sessions in preparation for the entrance exam, which was only a few months away. It turned out that they had personally requested Milk to train them as well. Cynthia already possessed more than enough skill to pass the exam with ease. As for Lilith, Weiss had originally intended for her to remain as his attendant, meaning she did not need to take the exam at all. However, she wanted to support Weiss academically as well, so he allowed her to take the test alongside him. In truth, neither of them required additional training. If anything, Cynthia, who was already guaranteed to pass, might become even more formidable than she had been in the original story if she continued to improve. While Weiss was lost in thought, Milk called out to him and tossed him a sword. He caught it instinctively. Milk then instructed that Weiss and Cynthia would spar first. She reminded him not to hold back just because Cynthia was his fiancée, warning him not to be distracted. Weiss felt a sense of embarrassment at her words. Behind him, Lilith offered her support. Milk ordered them to face each other. Before the sparring began, she left Weiss with a remark, implying that he should already understand what to do without needing a formal signal to begin. Weiss found himself confused by this. As he tried to understand her meaning, Cynthia had already moved. She leaped forward and spun into an attack. Weiss reacted quickly and managed to block it. Milk pointed out that she had already taught him the most important principle in battle. At that moment, Cynthia completed the idea. Striking first was everything. In the next instant, Cynthia vanished from his sight. Weiss focused, his gaze sharpening as he searched for her presence. Then she reappeared behind him, launching another attack. Weiss reacted in time and narrowly avoided the strike. Cynthia specialized in ice magic. Her signature technique involved infusing magic into her legs, allowing her to move at high speed as if she were skating, striking from blind spots. Weiss managed to evade each of her attacks, and in the brief moment he found an opening, he delivered a hit to her head. Cynthia reacted to the impact, and Weiss immediately felt regret for striking her. Milk then declared that the sparring was enough. Weiss panicked, trying to make it clear that he had only intended a light tap. Milk explained that since Weiss had swung his wooden sword while Cynthia was moving at high speed, the attack had effectively turned into a counter. Cynthia felt frustrated. She had sparred many times before at home, yet this was the first time her attacks had been avoided so easily. Lilith approached her and used healing magic on her head. Cynthia accepted the help, and Lilith remained calm as she treated her. Milk then questioned Weiss, wondering how he had been able to read Cynthia's high-speed movements, which should not have been easy to follow. Weiss showed confusion at the question. Milk brushed it off and decided they would see whether it had simply been luck. She then announced that the next opponent would be Lilith. Weiss was caught off guard, unable to hide his surprise at the idea of fighting her. He also questioned whether he was expected to continue fighting. Milk pointed out that he was not exhausted and urged him to stop complaining and proceed. As Weiss and Lilith faced each other, Lilith prepared herself for the match. Weiss responded with a calm acknowledgement. At first, Weiss dismissed the situation, thinking that he was about to fight someone who was merely a maid. However, that thought quickly faded. He recalled her movements from before, which were far from ordinary. If he let his guard down, he felt that it could cost him everything. In the next instant, Lilith vanished from his sight. Weiss was caught off guard as she moved rapidly around him, her motion almost impossible to follow. An attack came from his side, and he managed to block it just in time. Frustration began to build as another strike followed, and he barely defended against it again. Milk observed closely and realized that Weiss was able to perceive Lilith's movements. It became clear that his ability to read Cynthia's speed earlier had not been mere coincidence. Weiss, however, was unsettled. He could not understand what was happening. In the original story, Lilith had only been his attendant, barely present, and never portrayed as someone powerful. Yet now, despite only recently beginning to learn magic, her speed far surpassed his. In addition, she possessed clear knowledge of swordsmanship. Weiss realized that if he did not take the fight seriously, he would lose. Dark energy gathered in his hands as he raised them, activating his original magic, Dark Heal. The moment it took effect, Lilith came to a sudden stop. She immediately recognized it as Weiss's unique technique, a skill that healed allies within its range while continuously inflicting curse damage on enemies. She understood that she needed to escape the magic circle as quickly as possible. However, that thought quickly faded. She noticed that Weiss had released his wooden sword and was using both hands to maintain the spell, leaving him seemingly defenseless. Even if she retreated from the circle, as someone who relied on close combat, she would be at a disadvantage against ranged magic. Realizing that this might be her only chance, she decided to take advantage of the opening. She charged toward Weiss without hesitation. Weiss remained standing, a confident expression on his face. As Lilith launched her attack, it was stopped by an unseen barrier. Lilith was caught off guard and pushed back. Weiss had activated Absolute Barrier, another form of his original magic that combined the defensive properties of light magic with the strength of dark magic. Along with this, he had also been using Dark Eye. Even if his body could not fully keep up with Lilith's speed, by relying on Dark Eye and Absolute Barrier, he could continue defending against her attacks for as long as his mana allowed. Milk then shifted her attention to Lilith, observing her condition and questioning what she would do next, as if testing whether that was all she could manage. However, something felt off. Milk suddenly sensed that something was wrong and immediately shouted for Weiss to cancel the magic. Weiss did not understand what was happening. In the next moment, Lilith collapsed, overcome by dizziness. Milk rushed toward both of them. Afterward, Lilith sat beneath a tree, resting as she admitted her complete defeat against Weiss. Weiss felt uneasy and expressed concern for her condition. Milk reassured him that she had already given Lilith an advanced potion and that she would recover. Then, shifting her focus, she raised a more important concern, questioning the nature of the magic Weiss had just used. Milk understood that the magic drained vigor, but even so, she had never expected Lilith of all people to collapse within just a few seconds. She raised another question, wondering if there were additional effects to the magic. Weiss confirmed that there were and proceeded to explain. Dark Heal affected anyone who entered its magic circle by applying multiple debuffs at once: physical weakening, reduced stamina, lowered vitality, mana drain, decreased magic defense, reduced physical defense, slower attack speed, and reduced movement speed. Since Lilith still possessed a considerable amount of mana, Weiss concluded that this was the reason her mana had been rapidly drained, ultimately causing her to collapse. At that moment, a strong surge of energy surrounded Weiss's body. He then explained that he experienced the opposite effect. All the stats taken from the enemy were added to his own, strengthening him in the process. He further clarified that the more enemies present within the magic circle, the stronger he became. In addition, if he recognized someone as an ally, he could grant them the same enhancements. As he looked at Milk, Cynthia, and Lilith, a thought quietly formed in his mind. It felt like a familiar pattern was taking shape, making him wonder if this was the right moment to say something he had always imagined. It was the kind of line people dreamed of saying after being reincarnated into another world. He had always wanted to say it and questioned whether now was the right time. Before he could dwell on it further, Milk turned toward him and expressed her desire to duel him. She appeared energized, impressed by how much Weiss had grown. For Milk, it had been a long time since she had felt this kind of excitement. With a sharp and intense expression, she made it clear that Weiss would have to take responsibility for what he had shown. She urged him to use his power to face her directly. From that point on, Cynthia and Lilith continued training alongside him, enduring Milk's strict regimen day after day. Meanwhile, the complicated situation between Weiss, Lilith, and Cynthia remained unresolved. Time passed quickly, with days turning into months. Before they realized it, they were standing at the gates of the Noblesse Magic Academy. It was the day of the entrance exam, the moment when Weiss's path would finally cross with that of the protagonist. Within Noblesse Magic Academy, an institution known as the most prestigious in the kingdom and boasting the largest campus in the world, the entrance test was being held. It was a place sought after by many, and today marked an important day for all who had gathered. Nearby, a commotion broke out as a bully confronted a boy, accusing him of staring. The boy denied it, explaining that he had only noticed how large the bully was. The bully took offense and raised his fist to strike. Before the blow could land, Weiss stepped in and blocked the punch, gripping the bully's arm firmly. The bully reacted in pain and demanded to know who had intervened. Murmurs spread among the surrounding crowd as they recognized Weiss. Some whispered about the infamous abusive noble, while others pointed out that the girl beside him was Cynthia of House Violetta. There were also those who mentioned that the rumors of their engagement were true. Others speculated about the identity of the other girl accompanying him, commenting on Weiss's boldness in appearing at the exam alongside two striking companions. The bully's expression changed the moment he realized who stood before him. Recognizing Weiss Vincent, the villainous noble, he quickly lowered himself and begged for forgiveness, fearing retaliation. Weiss showed no interest in punishing him and dismissed him without hesitation, telling him to leave. The bully hurried away. Weiss reflected on the situation, realizing that even after all this time since his reincarnation, the terrible reputation of the former Weiss still remained. He understood that he would need to act as friendly as possible and gradually change how others perceived him. 2 years had passed since he began his training, and at last, the day of the Noblesse Magic Academy entrance test had arrived. On this day, Weiss knew that he would have to face a certain individual. That person was the one who had once expressed gratitude toward him for being saved. He was Alan, the protagonist. Alan approached with a welcoming attitude, pleased to meet Weiss. He acknowledged him and expressed his intention to do his best in the exam. He hoped that both of them would succeed and extended his hand in a gesture of goodwill. Weiss hesitated at the sight. Just as their hands were about to meet, a warning bell rang out, signaling the start of the exam. The moment passed without completion, as the girl accompanying Alan urged him to hurry, and the opportunity for the handshake slipped away. The girl turned back toward them and expressed her gratitude to Weiss for helping Alan. She was Cheryl Elias, Alan's childhood friend. As Alan and Cheryl hurried away, Weiss found himself dwelling on the feeling that had just surfaced. When Alan extended his hand, Weiss had hesitated. Even something as simple as speaking with him brought about a strong sense of unease. He could not understand why. It was not as if he disliked Alan. While it was true that his goal today was to defeat him in the exam, he had intended to remain on friendly terms afterward, even if from a distance. Soon after, the Duke announced the next stage of the exam, a practical combat test. He instructed everyone to change into the provided uniforms, explaining that they were hand-me-downs from former students but were designed to reduce damage from both magic and physical attacks. Even so, Weiss felt unsettled. His heart refused to calm down, and the strange unease only grew stronger. A violent impulse surfaced within him, a desire to crush Alan. Yet it did not stop there. The thought extended to everyone present. Weiss found himself questioning what was happening to him. Nearby, the Duke continued his explanation. The rules were simple. The winner would be determined by knocking the opponent out of the ring or forcing them to surrender. If a situation became too dangerous, the Duke would intervene. He then asked if there were any questions. One of the students raised his hand, the same bully from earlier, complaining that the uniform was too small for him. Another student voiced a similar concern, adding that it felt tight and even had an unpleasant smell. The Duke showed clear irritation and dismissed the complaints, questioning whether they were truly 15 years old given their size. He stated that those who passed would receive properly fitted uniforms, and for now, they would simply have to endure. He then declared the start of the test. Nearby, Lilith remarked on how impressive it was that uniforms had been prepared for all examinees, noting that it already felt like they had enrolled. Cynthia reflected on the situation, pointing out that many students abandoned their uniforms and disappeared, which only highlighted how harsh life at the academy truly was. Weiss agreed with that assessment. Noblesse Magic Academy was not only the most prestigious institution in the kingdom but also one of the most demanding. Anyone who failed to keep up would be expelled without hesitation. The lessons at the academy were so intense that some students failed to survive them. Many who left discarded their uniforms, never wanting to see them again. Even so, gaining admission itself was not particularly difficult. Even the former Weiss, who had been known for his laziness, had managed to pass in the original story. The Duke then called the next match, announcing examinee number 909, Weiss Vincent, against examinee number 907, Alan. At that moment, a man approached his instructor and remarked that the rain had begun to fall heavily. The instructor acknowledged it and ordered everyone except those currently engaged in matches to move to the spectator seats. As Weiss and Alan stepped onto the battlefield and faced each other, Alan approached the situation with composure, expressing his readiness for the match. Behind him, Cheryl showed her support, urging him on. On the other side, Weiss remained silent. Behind him, Lilith encouraged him as well. The mock battle began. Without hesitation, Weiss struck Alan across the face with his wooden sword, sending him flying backward. Immediately after, Weiss released his weapon and activated Dark Heal. A magic circle formed beneath him. Alan remained within its range, suffering under its effects. Cheryl, Cynthia, and Lilith all reacted with shock at what they were witnessing. Even the referee, standing within the circle, felt an unusual discomfort. Inside his mind, Weiss realized something was wrong. He could not suppress the sensation rising within him. A strong and overwhelming urge to crush his opponent continued to grow. He questioned the source of this feeling, trying to understand what had been troubling him since earlier. A thought surfaced, that this impulse might be coming from the former Weiss. It felt as though that presence was awakening within him. Driven by that force, Weiss moved forward, grabbed Alan by the collar and lifted him up. After the entrance exams had concluded, the headmaster questioned Milk and Zevis about what they had done to Weiss. The elderly man found it hard to believe that Weiss Vincent had managed to surpass all previous records across every exam. He was Gilles, the headmaster of Noblesse Magic Academy, and he wanted to know who had been responsible for raising Weiss to such a level. Gilles then raised another concern, wondering what they thought about Weiss possessing such dangerous abilities. Milk and Zevis remained silent in response. At that moment, Darius, an instructor at the academy, requested to speak with the headmaster. He pointed out that although Weiss's scores were the highest in the academy's history, he had not technically broken every record. Darius reminded Gilles of a student from the previous year. Gilles recalled it and noted that Weiss had only tied for first place with that particular girl. Milk then spoke, stating that she had done nothing special for Weiss. At most, she had only provided basic training. Zevis added that his role had been no different, as he had simply supported Weiss through meals and ensured he received enough protein. Darius showed clear curiosity at that explanation. Zevis elaborated, explaining that he had provided foods such as soy, dairy, and chicken tenders. Hearing this, Darius reacted strongly, slamming the table and expressing disbelief. He pointed out that Weiss had mastered not only the 4 major magic attributes but also the advanced elements of light and dark. Achieving such a level could not be explained by something so simple. Milk, however, remained indifferent, admitting that she had nothing more to add while casually drinking her alcohol. Darius immediately reacted again, questioning why she was drinking in front of the headmaster and demanding to know who had given it to her. Milk simply rested her head on the table, while Zevis calmly explained that she had likely brought it herself. Gilles intervened and told Darius to calm down, reminding him that Milk had always behaved that way. Darius acknowledged it but shifted his focus back to Weiss, expressing frustration over what had happened to Alan, who had nearly lost his life because of him. He emphasized that Alan was someone with proper training and exceptional talent. Before he could continue further, Milk interrupted, questioning whether he intended to say the same things even on a real battlefield. She pointed out that such complaints came across as jealousy, suggesting that he was simply reacting to losing a serious match. Darius raised his voice, insisting that if proper guidance had been given to Weiss from the beginning, things would have been different. Before he could finish, Zevis stepped in and told him to stop. Speaking calmly, Zevis addressed the headmaster and acknowledged that there might be concerns regarding Weiss's enrollment. He reassured him that Weiss would never use his power against the weak and emphasized that he had already changed. Rather than being consumed by his abilities, Weiss was now pushing himself through genuine effort, striving to become someone strong and dependable. Meanwhile, inside a classroom at Noblesse Magic Academy, a teacher greeted the newly enrolled students. She introduced herself as Chloe, an instructor who would be in charge of their class. She welcomed them and expressed her anticipation of guiding them through their time at the academy. As Weiss sat in his seat, he glanced toward Alan behind him. His thoughts drifted back to the day of the entrance exam, when he had successfully defeated him. At that time, Weiss had been overtaken by the lingering emotions of his former self and had nearly pushed Alan to the brink. Yet no matter how many times Alan was knocked down, he continued to rise again. With each attempt, he seemed to grow stronger. In the end, Weiss had won decisively. However, it had taken far longer to defeat Alan than he had expected. Thinking back on it, Weiss felt a sense of frustration. It was as if he had witnessed firsthand what it truly meant to be the protagonist. At that moment, Chloe snapped her fingers, drawing everyone's attention. A light appeared on the back of each student's hand, displaying a number, 1,000 points. She explained that this was the amount granted to every student. Some students began to question what these points represented. Chloe clarified that they served as a measure that would remain with them until graduation. While everyone else had received 1,000 points, Weiss Vincent had been granted 2,000 based on his test results. The room erupted in surprise. Students murmured among themselves, questioning why Weiss had been given double the amount and what it signified. Some wondered if it reflected their grades, while others felt that granting him twice as many points was unfair. Confusion spread as they sought further explanation. Chloe stated that rather than explaining everything through words, it would be easier for them to understand through experience. She instructed all the students to take wooden swords and proceed to the training grounds. A sense of tension spread among them as they followed her orders. Soon after, all the students gathered at the training grounds. Chloe then signaled the start of combat. She reminded them that while she had congratulated them on their enrollment, she had never promised that they would all graduate. By now, she believed they had already begun to understand. Any student whose points dropped to 0 would be expelled immediately. She then declared that, on this day, they would continue fighting until someone's points reached 0. Elsewhere, Milk spent her time drinking alcohol. Around her, several men lay defeated, while she remained seated casually, holding her drink. Since Weiss had left for the academy, each day had felt unusually empty to her. With that in mind, she decided to pass the time by obtaining a teaching license at Noblesse Magic Academy. Inside the classroom, someone approached Weiss and asked if he was indeed Weiss. The boy introduced himself as Louis and explained that he had watched Weiss's mock battle. He praised Weiss, describing his performance as impressive, and mentioned hearing that it was the highest score ever recorded. Nearby, Cynthia and Lilith gave off a clear presence that discouraged further interaction. Louis Meissen stood out as a bright, refreshing, and good-looking individual. In the original story, he was known for achieving excellent grades and graduating at the top of his class, a student with exceptional potential. And yet, that same Louis now stood at 0 points. Chloe approached him and questioned whether her earlier explanation had not been clear. She then declared that Louis Meissen was expelled on the spot. He had been completely defeated by Alan. Later, at the canteen, Weiss prepared to eat his meal, feeling troubled as he considered what to do next. He had been trying his best to avoid disrupting the original course of events, limiting his actions to defeating Alan while keeping everything else as close to the original story as possible. But now, the situation had already changed. The main heroine had somehow become his fiancée. At the same time, Louis, who was supposed to remain until graduation, had been expelled on the very first day. Everything was beginning to spiral into unexpected chaos. What troubled Weiss even more were the dark emotions rising within him, remnants of the original Weiss. Ever since encountering Alan, that inner presence had been pushing him toward aggression, not only against Alan but toward everyone around him. He had intended to act kindly, to slowly earn trust and maintain balance. But now, he felt a growing urge to crush everyone in his path. If he allowed himself to give in to those emotions and harm those around him, he would inevitably be hated, just as he had been in the original story. Nearby, Cynthia overheard his thoughts about wanting to crush everyone. She did not react with concern. Instead, she accepted it calmly, as if such a mindset was understandable. Weiss fell silent. Cynthia then thanked the cook for the meal, remaining composed. Weiss could not understand why she showed no reaction to what he had just expressed. To Cynthia, this was simply the reality of Noblesse Magic Academy. She had once been slightly worried about Weiss, believing him to be too kind. In a world where one either overpowers others or is overpowered, showing mercy was not an option. However, after witnessing his performance during the exam, she began to see him differently. Weiss listened quietly, taking in her words. Nearby, a chef offered another serving of pot au feu, which Cynthia declined. Lilith then shared a similar perspective. To her, the world of competition was harsh, and anyone who chose to stand within it had to be just as ruthless. Lilith expressed that, in the end, what mattered most was doing what he truly wanted. She made it clear that she would support him no matter what. Weiss felt a quiet sense of appreciation from her words. Nearby, the chef asked if they were still hungry, mentioning that there was still plenty of pot au feu left. Lilith indicated that she had already had enough. Cynthia then reminded Weiss that, as her fiancé, he should at least have the resolve to overcome everyone else. Weiss showed his gratitude to both of them. Behind them, the chef continued offering more pot au feu. Weiss reflected that speaking with them had helped him sort through his thoughts. Even if he could not fully accept everything immediately, he was glad that he had taken the time to talk with them. Lilith then suggested an idea. She took out a coin, proposing that if Weiss truly could not decide, he could leave it to chance. Weiss picked up the coin, considering the idea. Leaving things to fate was also an option. The course of events had already begun to fall apart, and he no longer knew what would happen next. If that was the case, perhaps it would be easier to stop overthinking and let the outcome be decided for him. As he flipped the coin, the chef leaned in from behind, urging him to finish the pot au feu that had been carefully prepared. The coin spun through the air before falling and rolling along the ground. One side bore the image of the kingdom's castle, while the other displayed a dragon, symbolizing strength. If it landed on heads, he would resist the impulse to follow the path of ruin and instead try to build a better relationship with Alan. If it landed on tails, then, before the result could be seen, someone picked up the coin. It was Alan, who handed it back to Weiss. Alan appeared and offered an apology for not greeting him earlier. Despite having been badly beaten before, he had still managed to enroll. He seemed genuinely glad to see Weiss again. More than that, there was a clear desire to face him once more in battle, as if that was the true reason behind his words. When the coin was returned to Weiss, it landed on tails. Seeing the result, he accepted it and decided that he too would face Alan once more. A grin formed on his face. The scene then shifted to the battlefield. Weiss moved without hesitation, releasing a magic attack that struck another student instantly. Chloe stepped in and declared the match over. Chris Schlegel was expelled. Another battle followed against a large opponent who charged forward with heavy punches. Weiss responded calmly, striking him with his wooden sword and bringing him down. Gustav Gregorio was expelled. Lehman Kudavareta was expelled. Karuna Kianich was expelled. Another student was expelled. Yet another was left buried with only his head visible, also expelled. Nearby, Cynthia watched with clear interest, impressed by Weiss's performance. Lilith noted that Weiss had already forced 6 more rivals out that day. In the forest, Weiss gave instructions, directing Cynthia and Lilith to flank the enemy from both sides and draw their attention. Lilith immediately moved to carry out the plan. Within his thoughts, Weiss acknowledged that he owed this resolve to Alan. Because of him, hesitation no longer held him back. He would face everything directly, crush his opponent, and tear apart the path that had once been set before him. Elsewhere within Noblesse Magic Academy, an unknown girl sat alone on her bed. She stared at the number displayed on her hand, 22 points. She was already close to her limit. She knew that she needed help. As her remaining time continued to count down, her future remained uncertain, hanging on the edge of expulsion. The match came to an end, and victory was declared for Team Weiss. It had already been 1 month since enrollment, and by that point, 10 students had dropped out. Among them, Weiss was responsible for sending 7 students out of the academy. At the announcement board, students gathered and murmured among themselves. The results displayed rankings across various fields: magic stealth training, magic tracking training, and magic defense training. In every category, Weiss Vincent held the top position. Nearby, a student called out to Weiss while sitting in his chair, expressing frustration and disbelief. He questioned how Weiss had become so strong, even wondering if it was as if he were living a second life. The one speaking was Duke Billion, Cheryl's childhood friend. Duke continued, recalling the previous day's flag battle. Weiss had slipped through the magic thread set by Cheryl with ease, overwhelmed Alan in an instant, and captured the flag before anyone could react. With that performance, Weiss had earned a total of 5,700 points, securing first place in the entire year by a wide margin. Duke could not comprehend how Weiss had achieved such results. Nearby, Cheryl told Duke to quiet down, finding him too noisy. Alan then apologized to both Duke and Cheryl for being defeated by Weiss again. Cheryl reassured him that he should simply aim to win next time. Afterward, Cheryl fixed a sharp gaze on Weiss, and Weiss returned her stare. In his thoughts, Weiss reflected that the former Weiss had often released his negative emotions through underhanded actions, which led to him being hated and ultimately destroyed. In contrast, the current Weiss expressed those emotions directly and fairly through matches. He had done nothing wrong and believed there was no reason for others to resent him. Even so, he could not understand why Cheryl continued to look at him that way. At another seat nearby, Weiss noticed Chloe standing in front of a student named Carta. Chloe warned her about the next practical test, making it clear that if she failed to earn any points, the outcome would be unavoidable. Carta acknowledged the warning and indicated that she was fine. Her name was Carta Viol. Chloe responded coldly, making it clear that she had not asked whether she was fine, and then left. From behind, Weiss watched her. In the original story, she had been expelled after the next exam. That frustration had later pushed her best friend to take things seriously and aim for graduation, forming part of a side story. Although the match had been fair, Weiss had ended up causing her best friend's expulsion. After that, Carta herself had quietly left Noblesse Magic Academy without leaving any particular mark. Nearby, 2 students laughed among themselves, mocking Carta. They questioned what she intended to do in the next exam, pointing out that it would be a tag battle and that she did not have a partner. One of them added that her best friend had already been expelled. Carta showed clear irritation. One of the girls continued, remarking on how her best friend had been completely defeated in the previous match, losing all her points at once after being overwhelmed by Weiss. Weiss then stepped closer to the 2 girls. Afterward, he turned toward Carta and offered to team up with her, extending his hand. Later, they moved to a cliffside. Carta questioned why Weiss would want to partner with her. She pointed out that she was on the verge of expulsion, while Weiss was the top-ranked first year, and she could not see how they matched at all. She also mentioned Cynthia. As she turned, she noticed Cynthia standing behind a tree, silently watching them. The intensity of her gaze unsettled her. Weiss asked what was wrong and questioned whether she was worried about his fiancée. He made it clear that she did not need to concern herself with that. In his view, Cynthia wanted him to become the best in the academy, and she would understand that partnering with someone else was simply a means to achieve victory. Carta, however, remained uneasy, recalling the intense feeling she had sensed earlier. When she looked back again, Cynthia was no longer there, leaving her confused. Weiss then told her to listen. He clarified that he was not trying to help her out of kindness. He had no time or energy to spare for pity toward every student who faced expulsion. Carta continued to glance behind her, uncertain whether what she had seen was real or simply her imagination, as Cynthia was no longer there. Weiss went on, explaining that it would be a waste if she were expelled. He recognized her ability, noting that her flying magic was impressive and difficult even for skilled mages to control. Someone with that level of mastery should not go unnoticed. Still, Carta could not shake the feeling that she had not imagined it. She was certain that Cynthia had been there just moments ago. Weiss continued speaking, adding that for the upcoming exam, partnering with her would be the most efficient choice because of her unique skill. At that moment, Cynthia appeared once again. She acknowledged Carda's keen perception, noting that she had been able to sense even faint traces of magic that Weiss himself had not detected. She considered whether Carda's awareness might even surpass Weiss's dark eye. However, Cynthia also pointed out that Carda had failed to notice Lilith, who had mastered the techniques of assassination. Just then, Lilith appeared from behind Carda, startling her. She explained that the upcoming tag battle would be a joint exam involving students from all 3 school years. She also revealed that Weiss had chosen to partner with Carda as part of a strategy, selecting someone with a specialized ability rather than pairing with Cynthia or Lilith, who were already capable of fighting effectively even against second- and third-year students. Cynthia and Lilith stepped closer to Carda. Cynthia made it clear that she would be teaming up with Lilith, while Lilith encouraged Carda to take the exam alongside Weiss. Weiss then reaffirmed his decision, explaining that this was the reason he had chosen her as his partner. With little time left before the exam, he stated that they would begin special training immediately. Carda, overwhelmed, accepted the offer. And just like that, Weiss's special training with Carda began in preparation for the upcoming exam. As Weiss and Carda walked together, Weiss brought up the topic of flying magic. He noted that it was a difficult type of magic to master, but he felt that he was beginning to grasp it. Carda responded by pointing out that he could barely stay in the air for even a couple of seconds. She explained that for the exam, the plan was for her to carry Weiss while flying, so there was no real need for him to learn it. Weiss acknowledged her point but added that he saw this as a rare opportunity to learn something new. Carda appeared puzzled. Weiss continued, explaining that there was no harm in learning it, as any form of magic could become a powerful weapon depending on how it was used. At the moment, he had someone like Carda, who was skilled in flying magic, right beside him. He thought it would be a good chance to learn from her and apologized for involving her in something unrelated to the exam. Carda found herself at a loss for words. Weiss went on, assuring her that in return, he would make sure she would not be expelled in the upcoming exam. He then asked if she would be willing to continue helping him with flying magic even after the exam was over. Carda let out a quiet laugh and smiled. In her thoughts, she realized that rumors could not always be trusted. She had never imagined that Weiss was someone who worked so hard. She agreed to help him, expressing her willingness to teach him as long as he was fine with it. In her mind, she reflected on how people described Weiss as a lazy and disgraceful noble, yet the person before her was completely different. She found herself wanting to become like him, someone eager to learn and explore new things, someone who worked diligently. Nearby, Chloe observed the two of them walking together. At the same time, Gills reviewed the records and remarked that Weiss-Vincent's scores were difficult to believe for a first-year student. He noted that more than half of the expelled students had been defeated by Weiss alone. Chloe agreed, acknowledging Weiss's impressive performance. However, she also pointed out that the other students this year were equally remarkable. Among them, the one who had surprised her the most was Alan, the apprentice of Darius. Time and again he had risen from the brink of defeat, growing stronger with each return. There were also 2 others who had caught her attention, Lilith and Cynthia. They had grown at a pace that would have been unimaginable when they first enrolled. The 2 of them trained as if their lives were constantly at risk, engaging in dangerous combat without reinforced training gear and using real swords instead of wooden ones. That relentless, life-or-death style of training had made them significantly stronger. After sparring, Lilith and Weiss treated each other's injuries with healing magic. Cynthia observed Lilith and recognized her strength. Lilith, in turn, regarded Cynthia as the more impressive one. Cynthia expressed her intention to grow even stronger, not merely as someone following along, but as an individual who could stand proudly on her own. She wanted to remain by Weiss's side as his equal. Lilith shared a similar resolve. She wanted to become stronger for Weiss as well, to the point where he could rely on her whenever he was in danger. That desire drove her to aim for even greater strength. The 2 acknowledged each other's abilities, each recognizing the other's strength while refusing to consider themselves superior. At the same time, they set a clear goal: to pull Carda away from Weiss's side. The following morning, Carda sat on her bed, trembling slightly. She could not understand why she suddenly felt such a chill. Then the day of the exam arrived. Duke, Cheryl, and Alan stood together, deciding their pairings through chance. The outcome would determine who would be forced to partner with a random individual. They proceeded with the decision without hesitation. Elsewhere, Chloe announced that the next group would be transported to Mount Gariel. Soon after, Weiss and Carda were transported as well. Weiss immediately focused on their plan, intending to target upperclassmen with the highest points and take them down. He checked whether Carda was prepared, and she affirmed her readiness. An announcement echoed across the area. All students had now been transported to their assigned locations across the mountain. From that moment onward, the The joint 3-year tag survival test officially began. Somewhere else, Milk rested in a hammock, spending her time leisurely after having already dealt with several opponents. As she relaxed, she tried to recall something she had been planning earlier but could not remember it at first. Then it came back to her. She had intended to obtain a teaching license at Noblesse Magic Academy. The tag survival test had already begun. Ariel was suddenly struck by electricity, his body convulsing as pain overtook him. His partner, Vivid, turned toward him in confusion, unable to understand what had happened. Behind them, another student stood unnoticed until it was too late. An announcement followed shortly after. First-year students number 31, Ariel, and number 27, Vivid, were declared unable to continue and would be sent back to Noblesse Magic Academy. Elsewhere, Liddy laughed at the outcome, considering first-year students easy targets who could not even detect a simple trap. His partner cautioned him not to underestimate them just because they were underclassmen, mentioning that there was said to be a particularly outstanding student among them this year. Liddy dismissed the idea, believing it was nothing worth noting. He went on to remark that all the well-known students from that year had already been expelled. His partner agreed, stating that they had all been nothing more than talk. As the conversation continued, his partner tried to recall the name of that first-year student, identifying him as Weiss Vincent. When he turned to look at Liddy, he found him already on the ground, having been struck down by Weiss. Weiss stood there with a calm yet intense expression, while the second-year student reacted in shock. An announcement followed, declaring second-year student number 10, Liddy, unable to continue. The remaining second-year student grew angry and immediately launched a fire spell toward Weiss. Weiss evaded the attack with ease. When the student looked up, he saw Weiss descending from above. The power of the attack had been impressive. Even though it was a basic fire spell, it carried a high density of magical energy, cast without any incantation. Weiss noticed the star on the student's shoulder, a mark given to those with excellent academic performance. Realizing that this opponent was skilled, he understood that he could not afford to hold back. As Weiss descended, he used an invisible construct to alter his movement midair, dodging another incoming attack. The second-year student watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend how Weiss had changed direction while airborne. Weiss repeated the maneuver, then surged forward. In an instant, he delivered a series of rapid strikes before passing through his opponent. The second-year student collapsed. Elsewhere, Carta finished subduing another opponent, leaving them partially buried. Although Weiss had not fully mastered flying magic, he had developed a new technique instead. By combining dark, light, and non-elemental magic, he created a transparent construct he referred to as the unnatural wall. As Weiss had just demonstrated, he could create the unnatural wall midair and use it as a foothold. However, it only lasted for a brief moment, just enough for him to push off. The farther he moved away from the ground, the more mana it consumed, limiting how high he could go. Even so, it was more than sufficient. His tactical options had expanded greatly, and in the end, learning flying magic had proven worthwhile. Suddenly, Weiss sensed an incoming attack from behind. His barrier activated instantly, blocking the strike. The student who launched the attack was left in disbelief. At the same moment, another attack came from above and struck that student, sending him flying and rendering him unable to continue. The attacker was Carta, descending from above. She expressed concern as she had attempted to signal Weiss about the approaching team, but when he did not notice, she chose to act immediately. Weiss dismissed the concern and acknowledged that her decision had been the correct one. Nearby, hidden behind the trees, another student had been observing their exchange. As Weiss commented on how Carta had taken down an opponent with a single blow, and Carta reflected on the automatic activation of his barrier, the hidden student began to understand their abilities. He then stepped forward, revealing himself. From his observations, he concluded that Weiss's defensive magic was a combination of dark and light elements. While both Weiss and Carta possessed high-level abilities, he pointed out that their techniques were inefficient and could not be used repeatedly. Weiss recognized him as the partner of the student they had just defeated. The student introduced himself as Archimedes and made it clear that Weiss should not become overconfident after defeating weaker opponents. He believed that Weiss had no chance of winning against him. Archimedes released a strong presence as he prepared himself, claiming that removing his glasses would significantly increase his combat ability. As he spoke, Weiss had already begun preparing his next move. He activated Dark Heal. Archimedes was immediately affected, feeling his strength being drained away. He could not understand the nature of the ability, as it was not something he had encountered before. Weiss then closed the distance and launched his attack. Moving swiftly, he struck through Archimedes, who collapsed shortly after and became unable to continue. Weiss acknowledged that another opponent had been eliminated. He then instructed Carta to maintain their momentum and continue gathering points from careless upperclassmen. Carta checked her points and was stunned to see the increase, rising from 22 to 1,336. Elsewhere in the forest, Alan and Cheryl were approached by Lilith and Cynthia. As they faced one another, the atmosphere shifted, as if a brief clash was about to begin. Meanwhile, in another part of the field, Weiss continued eliminating opponents. As they moved, he pointed out that second- and third-year students had completely stopped appearing. Carta observed the same, noting that they no longer seemed to be nearby. Weiss reasoned that the repeated announcements from the magic birds about defeated students had made the others cautious. They had likely realized that a strong opponent was present in the area. Even so, Weiss remained confident, certain that it would not matter where they tried to hide as long as he and Carta could pursue them from above. He decided that they would ignore the first-year students and focus entirely on hunting second- and third-year opponents. Carta followed his lead without hesitation. The reason Weiss had chosen to partner with Carta lay in her unique abilities. Her mastery of flying magic, something even experienced mages struggled with, combined with her exceptional detection skills, made her an ideal ally. While scanning the surroundings, Carta detected someone and informed Weiss that the individual ahead was likely a third-year student, as their presence was well concealed. Weiss immediately moved, taking off from above and diving down. With flying magic and detection working together, they were able to cover a wide area and launch surprise attacks from the sky. In a forest, attacks from directly overhead were difficult to defend against, and with magic birds flying around, it became even harder to distinguish Weiss as a human presence. Weiss struck the target from behind, and the opponent collapsed. Surprise attacks in this world were highly effective. Those who were unaware rarely maintained defensive magic, making it possible to defeat them with a single strike from a blind spot. This was why his mentor, Milk, had repeatedly emphasized the importance of taking the first move. After considering how much time remained, Carta estimated that there were about 20 minutes left. Weiss reacted with frustration, recognizing that time was running short. He urged Carta to quickly locate more third-year students. Carta was taken aback by his urgency and told him to remain calm, pointing out that they had already accumulated enough points and that there was no need to take further risks. Weiss remained unsatisfied, feeling that what they had achieved so far was nowhere near enough. He reminded Carta that the Academy's point system came with special privileges, and the more points they earned, the greater the rewards became. He went on to explain the system in detail. Reaching C rank required 5,000 points and granted access to a private room. B rank, at 10,000 points, provided luxurious private rooms. A rank, at 15,000 points, offered a full tuition waiver. Finally, S rank, at 20,000 points, allowed a student to skip grades and graduate early. At present, Weiss had reached C rank. He also noted that as students advanced to the second and third years, the total number of students decreased significantly, while the number of those reaching B and A ranks increased. Despite that, in the long history of the Academy, no one had ever achieved S rank. Carta was surprised by this realization and understood that Weiss was targeting higher ranks by taking down upperclassmen. Weiss clarified that his current goal was B rank. While reaching S rank remained his ultimate ambition someday, it was not his immediate priority. He then pointed out one particular benefit of B rank. The private room privileges included access to premium fruits through room service without limit. Carta quickly understood what was driving him. Weiss reflected on the past. During the harsh days of his training, his only source of enjoyment had been the desserts after meals. However, as the training grew more intense, he gradually lost his ability to appreciate the taste of fruit. Then one day, Zevis prepared something special for him, a super premium fruit known as mellomelon. That moment restored his sense of taste. The fruit had been so exceptional that it left a lasting impression on him. It was also extremely rare and difficult to obtain. Yet with B-rank privileges, it would be available without restriction. With renewed determination, Weiss set his focus on earning enough points from upperclassmen during the exam to experience that taste once again. Then, shifting his tone, he looked toward Carta with a softer expression and made it clear that he needed her cooperation until the very end. Carta accepted without hesitation, recognizing that he was also helping her in return. In her thoughts, Carta found his motivation unusual. She had expected his drive to come from something more serious, never imagining that it was tied to food. Her family, in fact, cultivated mellomelons themselves. She quietly wondered whether revealing that fact would lead Weiss to visit someday. Suddenly, nearby, a massive pillar of dark smoke or energy erupted from the ground. Weiss and Carta were both startled by the sight. Even without closer inspection, Carta could tell that whatever was causing it was far beyond ordinary. She recognized it as something overwhelming, something she could only describe as a true monster. The situation felt impossible to handle. She urged that they should withdraw immediately. However, when she turned to Weiss, he had already moved ahead. Weiss had landed and was dashing straight toward the source of the disturbance. As he approached, he saw a girl sitting calmly at the center of it all. She spoke, recognizing him as Weiss Vincent. Weiss immediately identified her as Eva Everil, a second-year student. He acknowledged her presence and challenged her to a match. Eva responded with a composed smile, accepting the challenge. Eva Everil was known as the strongest student in the academy. She was regarded as the true final opponent, a presence so overwhelming that she was often described as a game-breaking anomaly. In the original story, no one had ever been able to defeat her. Because of her unmatched strength, she had grown bored of life at the academy and would eventually leave on her own after this exam. If Weiss intended to face her, this was his only opportunity. With only 10 minutes remaining, he resolved to give everything he had. Defeating her would mark the conclusion of this phase of the exam. Without hesitation, Weiss charged forward with full force. Elsewhere, another battle was unfolding between Cheryl and Alan against Lilith and Cynthia. Cheryl had already fallen, leaving Alan as the last one standing. Cynthia observed the situation, while Lilith maintained her focus on the fight. Their goal was clear. If they could defeat Alan, someone even Weiss had struggled to fully overcome, it would prove their strength. Alan, pushed to his limits, released a powerful surge of energy. The intensity of it caught both Lilith and Cynthia off guard. The exam came to an end, leaving behind the aftermath of Weiss's duel with Eva. The battlefield showed clear signs of destruction from their clash. Weiss stood there, breathing heavily, exhausted from the fight. In contrast, Eva remained composed, showing no signs of fatigue. She acknowledged his strength, noting that he had forced her to use magic. Weiss, however, recognized that she had still been holding back. In his mind, Weiss accepted that Eva Everil was overwhelmingly powerful. He had used every ability at his disposal, Absolute Barrier, Dark Eye, and Dark Heal, yet none of them had been effective against her. Eva reflected on her time at the academy, having already grown bored with it and planning to leave after the exam. However, after facing Weiss, her perspective shifted. She found him interesting enough to remain at the academy a while longer. Soon after, an announcement was made, signaling that all students would be transported back to Noblesse Magic Academy. With that, the exam concluded. Once again, Weiss had caused a major shift in the expected course of events. Eva chose to stay at the academy, and Carta avoided expulsion. However, another unexpected outcome followed. Weiss learned that Cynthia and Lilith had been defeated. The result left him confused, unable to believe it at first. He began to question who could have accomplished such a feat. Cynthia reflected on her loss, recognizing that she had become overconfident in her own growth, which led to the outcome. She also felt responsible for involving Lilith and putting her in danger. Lilith, in turn, blamed herself, believing that her own weakness had contributed to the result and that she had diminished Cynthia's standing. Weiss overheard their exchange and came to a realization. The one who had defeated them was Alan. He turned his gaze toward Alan, who looked back at him. With that, the joint 3-year tag exam came to a close. Back in their regular academy life, Weiss soon advanced to B rank, gaining access to a more comfortable lifestyle. Though daily life remained competitive, facing lower-ranked students no longer brought him the same sense of challenge. For a time, it seemed that these calmer days would continue. Then, Chloe made an announcement, introducing a guest instructor for the day. When the instructor stepped forward and greeted the class, the reaction was immediate. The students were visibly surprised by her presence. At the same time, Weiss felt something change within him, as his vision slowly began to take on a red tint. It turned out that the new instructor was Milk. Seeing her there, Weiss was left in disbelief, feeling as though a nightmare had returned. Milk introduced herself and announced that she would now be in charge of their combat training. She then asked if anyone had any questions. Duke Billion raised his hand and questioned why she had come as a substitute instructor. Nearby, Weiss found himself grateful that Duke had voiced the same question he had been thinking. He wondered why Milk had appeared here and what had brought her to the academy. However, Milk dismissed Duke's question outright, treating it as unnecessary. Duke was left embarrassed by the response. Weiss began to question what was going on with Milk. At that moment, Chloe stepped in and provided an explanation. The academy was currently short on instructors. Since the recent tag survival test, many upperclassmen had requested additional combat training outside of regular classes, creating the need to bring in more instructors. Weiss fixed his gaze on Milk, coming to an understanding. The upperclassmen had become motivated, unwilling to be looked down upon by underclassmen. At the same time, Weiss felt that bringing Milk in as an instructor was a serious mistake. Milk then turned her attention directly toward Weiss and called him out. He was startled by the sudden focus. She questioned whether he had been thinking something unnecessary. Weiss was taken aback, wondering how she could tell. He quickly composed himself and denied it, claiming that he had only been distracted for a moment. Milk accepted his response without further comment. Later, at the training grounds on the mountain, Milk ordered Weiss to perform push-ups. Weiss struggled under the weight placed on him, finding it difficult to lift himself as the burden pressed down heavily. Milk remarked that it had been a while and observed that Weiss had improved quite a bit over the past few months. In his mind, Weiss could not help but think that Milk had come to the academy just to make his life harder. Nearby, a few students noticed that Weiss was actually paying attention during training, which was unusual for him. They began to wonder about the substitute instructor. Milk immediately picked up on their whispers and turned toward them with a sharp gaze. Her expression alone was enough to silence them. She made it clear that their current level of effort was not acceptable, viewing them as spoiled and lacking discipline. She then gave a new command. Everyone present was to climb the mountain continuously until sunset. As for Weiss, his task was even harsher. He was to climb while doing push-ups. Weiss tried to object, realizing how unrealistic it was, but the orders stood. With Milk now in charge, the combat training sessions became far more intense than before. It felt like a level of hardship beyond what they had already endured. As each training day approached, the students began to feel a growing sense of dread. However, there were moments that felt like brief relief. On one particular day, the class of boys was brought to a swimming pool. Weiss found the situation confusing, and the other students were equally uncertain about what Milk had planned this time. Soon it became clear. A group of female students arrived, and Milk appeared as well, apologizing for the delay. She then announced that the session for the day would be water training. The atmosphere among the boys shifted immediately upon seeing the girls in swimwear, and excitement spread among them. Milk, however, regarded their reaction with clear disapproval, seeing them as immature. Amid all of this, Alan remained calm and unaffected. Because the instructor had grown tired of the boys' behavior, the water training session was never held again. Later, in the cafeteria, Carta sat alone as usual. A few students nearby noticed her and began pointing it out. They remarked that she was always by herself and questioned why she never ate with Weiss and the others. Carta explained that Weiss was usually with Cynthia, and she felt that joining them would only be an inconvenience. The students responded with laughter, agreeing with her reasoning. They went on to say that, in the end, Weiss and Carta had only been temporary partners during the tag team exam. They added that Carta had only avoided expulsion because she had relied on Weiss during that time, and they reminded her that she should properly show her gratitude. Carta reacted with a sharp look, which immediately caught their attention. The students mocked her response, questioning her attitude. Nearby, Cynthia and Lilith had been watching the exchange. The students continued, calling Carta nothing more than a burden who could only rely on flying magic. They claimed that she was clinging to the academy by depending on someone stronger and warned that without Weiss by her side, she would be expelled in no time. They made it clear that she should be prepared for what was coming. At that moment, Cynthia and Lilith approached Carta and addressed her. Cynthia then invited her to join them for a meal. Carta reacted with unease, feeling as though one problem had just been replaced by another. As they sat together, Cynthia spoke calmly, explaining that she had reconsidered her opinion of Carta. She acknowledged that during the recent joint tag team exam, Carta and Weiss had managed to defeat 24 students, including second- and third-year participants. Cynthia recognized this achievement as impressive, noting that it was a record-breaking result. Carta dismissed the praise, believing that everything had been accomplished by Weiss alone. However, Lilith did not agree with that view. She recognized that even Weiss would not have been able to achieve those results by himself. Lilith pointed out that Carta's flying magic and her exceptional abilities had played a crucial role in making that outcome possible. She acknowledged that even if she and Cynthia had partnered with Weiss, they would not have been able to achieve the same result. Cynthia admitted that the situation left her feeling frustrated, as both she and Lilith had been completely defeated. Lilith then expressed her hope that Carta would continue supporting Weiss from now on. Carta became flustered by this, and at that moment, Cynthia's tone shifted. She revealed that both she and Lilith had wanted to speak with Carta about this matter for quite some time. She questioned why Carta had been avoiding them. Carta tried to respond, but Cynthia eased the tension, making it clear that there was no need to dwell on it. She expressed her intention that, from that point forward, the three of them would get along alongside Weiss. Hearing this, Carta smiled with relief. She then wondered where Weiss was at that moment. Elsewhere, Weiss was lying on his bed, unable to move due to the strain and injuries from the recent water training under Milk. He found himself hoping that Milk would step in to heal him, but she showed no intention of doing so. Later on, the results of Weiss's training with Carta became evident. During the exam, Carta turned the situation around against those who had mocked her, defeating them and ultimately leading to their expulsion. Meanwhile, Alan recalled the day his village was engulfed in flames. On that day, he lost both his family and his home. Several months earlier, Cheryl had told him about Noblesse Magic Academy. Alan understood that graduating from that academy could grant him a status comparable to that of a noble. With that recognition, he realized what it meant for him. It would give him the ability to act on his own, to pursue the one who had taken everything from him. With that in mind, Alan made his decision to take the entrance exam for the academy. From that point on, he trained rigorously with the help of Cheryl and his mentor, Darius, preparing himself for the challenge ahead. Despite all his effort, his exam results turned out to be far worse than he had expected. Weiss Vincent stood out as overwhelmingly powerful, leaving a strong impression on him. Even so, Alan managed to pass, despite believing that he had failed. The relief of success, however, did not last long. After enrollment, the Academy's point system pushed him to the brink of failure time and time again. He remembered being approached by another student who mocked him, referring to him as someone who had been defeated by Weiss and treating him as an easy target for gaining points. That moment strengthened his resolve. He refused to accept a life where everything was taken from him. Before long, Alan noticed that Weiss had begun to observe him closely. It seemed that Weiss recognized something in him, someone worth facing in battle. As the top-ranked first-year student, Weiss stood ahead of him, but Alan felt the same drive. He wanted to face him again. He resolves to catch up, to continue winning, and to eventually surpass him. This time, he aims to defeat Weiss. Back in the present, that determination surfaced as anger. Alan confronted Weiss, directing his frustration toward him. Before Alan walked away, he made it clear how much he despised Weiss. Weiss responded in kind, showing that the feeling was mutual. Nearby, other students noticed the tension between them. They watched with curiosity, wondering what the two had been arguing about. Later, Weiss was seen practicing with his sword. From a distance, Milk observed him and noted how hard he was working. She seemed impressed by his effort. Weiss admitted that he could not clear his mind of distracting thoughts. Milk quickly guessed that it had something to do with Alan. She mentioned that she had heard from Darius that Weiss and Alan did not get along. Weiss acknowledged it, explaining that Alan's attitude frustrated him. To him, Alan seemed too soft, and that alone was enough to irritate him. Even during that day's history lesson, the difference in their views had become clear. Earlier in class, the topic had been about how the country treated slaves and demi-humans. Weiss had expressed his thoughts on the matter. He believed that many slaves came from poor families, often born to parents who lacked resources and failed to provide proper guidance. As a result, they either turned to crime or were left to suffer without support. From his perspective, the slave system served as a way to control such outcomes and was not entirely unjust. Alan listened to this without reacting outwardly, but it was clear that he disagreed. That quiet disagreement only fueled Weiss's frustration. After class, Alan approached him in the hallway. Weiss later recounted this to Milk. Alan had rejected the idea entirely, viewing slavery as inherently wrong. He had even gone as far as to question the necessity of nobles themselves. For someone who rarely showed strong emotion, Alan had expressed these views openly, even in front of other nobles. Weiss recognized that he was not the only one surprised by it. However, what unsettled him the most was the way Alan spoke with such conviction. To Weiss, that straightforward and idealistic attitude only made him more irritated. Weiss continued reflecting on what Alan had said, finding it shallow and lacking substance. To him, speaking about how war was bad without offering any concrete solution was no different from empty preaching. He felt that Alan spoke as if simply avoiding conflict would solve everything, ignoring the realities of the world. Even if slavery were abolished, war would still exist. Weiss considered the fate of children who would lose their families in such conflicts. The idea that those who were capable should help others did not strike him as practical. In his view, people were driven by their basic desires, rest, food, and other instincts, and in this world, even the urge to fight was part of human nature. Because of that, he saw no meaning in clinging to lofty ideals that ignored reality. As he spoke, Milk began to lose interest. Weiss noticed and asked if she had been listening. Milk gave a brief acknowledgement, then pointed out something he had not considered. Alan had grown up in an orphanage, and Weiss's words may have affected him more deeply than expected. She admitted that she could understand why Alan might lose his composure under those circumstances, but she also found it surprising that Weiss himself had become so heated over what was only a classroom discussion. She wondered whether his reaction had been influenced by the fact that his opponent was Alan. Weiss fell silent. In that quiet moment, he realized that his anger had not been entirely his own. It had been influenced by the lingering emotions of the previous Weiss. He began to question whether the original Weiss had harbored such deep resentment toward Alan. Milk then reminded him that having opposing views was not inherently wrong. However, she also noted that in adulthood, even expressing such differences was often restricted. Without lingering further on the topic, Milk tossed a wooden sword toward Weiss, signaling the start of sparring practice. She made it clear that he should be ready. The two began their exchange. During the spar, Milk instructed him to keep his movements minimal. Weiss acknowledged the advice. He swung his sword at her, but she evaded the attack with ease. In response, she struck him from behind with a kick, pointing out that he still did not fully understand. As the spar continued, Milk advanced on him, remarking that the situation felt familiar. She revealed that she had once been a student at the same academy. Weiss reacted with surprise at this revelation. Milk explained that during her time there, she had clashed with all kinds of people. It was something inevitable for anyone who entered the academy. Weiss had seen Milk's profile many times in the original game, yet he had never encountered any mention of this part of her past. Milk revealed that this was the first time she had spoken about it. It was something she had preferred not to remember, which was why she had kept it hidden until now. In the end, she had been expelled from the academy. Weiss reacted with surprise. Milk continued, explaining that at that time, the academy's point system had not yet been as refined as it was now. Because of that, she had been forced to leave before she could fully demonstrate her abilities. She admitted that she had made excuses back then, but the truth was simple: she had not been strong enough. Weiss found it difficult to accept that, but Milk clarified that everyone starts out weak. At the time, she had overestimated her own strength, and that gap between perception and reality had likely determined her outcome. As they continued sparring, a man approached and observed them from a distance. Milk then spoke about how difficult it was for people to truly change. That had been her belief. However, she acknowledged that Weiss was different, as he had managed to change. She added that it was natural to lose one's way at times and that conflicts were sometimes unavoidable. Still, a person's convictions had to be carried through. In the end, Milk recognized a distinction between herself and Weiss. Unlike her in the past, Weiss already understood the path he needed to follow. Weiss fell silent for a moment, then noted that Milk seemed unusually kind that day. Milk dismissed the remark, insisting that she had always been that way. After a brief pause, she admitted that anyone could show kindness when they chose to. She then shifted the focus back to training, stating that they needed to think about Weiss's next exercise after their sparring. Weiss realized that the time for that next stage had already come. Milk explained that the upcoming exercise would not be something he could take lightly. Failure would not simply result in expulsion. It was a harsh survival training conducted in the northern region of the Garial Mountains, an area known to be inhabited by dangerous monsters. It was an exercise that had claimed lives every year. Weiss remained firm, believing that he would not die and that such an outcome would not happen to him. Milk reminded him of her own past, where she had failed because she had overestimated her strength. She made it clear that she did not want Weiss to repeat her mistake. She cautioned him not to become arrogant just because he had risen to the top among the lower grades. Weiss accepted her warning, acknowledging its truth. After that, Weiss suggested continuing their sparring. Milk agreed without hesitation. Just as they were about to clash again, the man who had been observing them from behind suddenly called out, and the lights were turned off, plunging the area into darkness. With that, Milk decided to end the training for the day. Weiss accepted it without protest. The Noblesse Magic Academy's combat training uniform was designed to function within a prepared magic circle. When activated upon taking damage, it would consume a significant amount of magic power in exchange for reducing injury and pain. Because of this system, students were able to engage in serious combat while maintaining a level of safety. Through such methods, the Academy had produced many individuals who far surpassed those from other institutions. However, the instructor made it clear that there were opponents in this world against whom such protections would be useless. Those opponents were monsters. The next day's exercise was then announced as a survival test in the northern Garial Mountains, an area inhabited by these creatures. While withdrawal was allowed, the instructor warned that doing so would negatively affect the students' grades. He then instructed those who were prepared to sign their names. Weiss stood up first and joined the line, followed by Cynthia and then Lilith. After returning to his seat, Weiss glanced toward Alan and suggested the idea of withdrawing. Alan reacted strongly, showing no intention of backing down. Cheryl also made her stance clear, unwilling to withdraw, while questioning Weiss's sudden remark. Weiss gave no deeper explanation, simply moving on from the comment. As he walked away, Cheryl found herself wondering about his behavior. Soon after, all the students completed their signatures. The instructor acknowledged their decision, noting that everyone had chosen to participate. The event was about to begin. Up until now, all their training had only been preparation. From this point onward, the real challenge would start. The Academy's expulsion system, in a sense, served as a form of mercy. By removing those who lacked the necessary ability early, it reduced the chances of students losing their lives unnecessarily. From here on, however, failure would no longer be limited to expulsion. After traveling to the Garial Mountains, the class arrived at the training area. The survival exercise, often referred to as a death game, was about to begin. The instructor explained that the duration would be 3 days. Students were to form pairs and survive within the forest. As previously stated, the area was populated by an unknown number of monsters. Defeating monsters would earn points, but more importantly, survival itself was the top priority. Chloe added that, similar to the previous tag test, the students would be transported to different locations in pairs across the area. Even within the game, the weather was always an unpredictable factor, and a blizzard represented the worst possible scenario. Combined with the already harsh nature of the event, it created a heavy and unsettling atmosphere for Weiss. The instructor began announcing the pairings. Students whose names were called stepped forward. Shirley Elias and Lilith Scarlett were assigned as a pair. This combination differed from the original storyline, though Weiss believed that the overall course of events might not change because of it. Next, Cynthia Violetta and Alan were called. This pairing matched the original setup. Cynthia, as the main heroine, was meant to grow closer to Alan during this event. That was how it was supposed to unfold. Cynthia expressed her devotion toward Weiss, and Weiss acknowledged her feelings. However, he could not shake the sense that things would not remain that simple. Nearby, Alan and Shirley exchanged words before parting for the exercise, showing the level of familiarity that others quickly noticed. Students around them commented on how close they seemed, as if they were already together. Weiss found himself questioning the situation. With someone like Shirley already by his side, he could not understand why Alan would later develop such a deep connection with Cynthia. It did not seem like a matter of shallow behavior. Instead, he realized that what had just taken place would become their final exchange. At that moment, Carta informed Weiss that his name had been called. Weiss stepped forward and learned that he had been paired with Duke Billion. Duke acknowledged the pairing and prepared to cooperate with him for the next 3 days. For Alan, whose life had already been filled with hardship, this exercise would bring another painful turning point. In order to move forward from that, his bond with Cynthia would deepen rapidly. The event that would trigger that change was the loss of Shirley Elias, a moment that would occur during this very training exercise. Later, several monsters rapidly hopped and dashed across different areas, and Duke informed Weiss that one of them was heading in his direction. Weiss prepared himself and calmly acknowledged it. Activating his dark eye, he was able to clearly track the monsters. The moment they came close enough, he immediately struck them all down. At the same time, Duke was easily taking care of the others with his bare hands. He did not rely only on his punches, as he also brought down monsters with powerful kicks. He even performed flips while delivering his attacks. As Weiss watched him, he remained unimpressed. An announcement soon declared that points had been awarded to the Weiss-Duke pair. Hearing this, Weiss stated that they should move on to the next target. For some reason, Weiss had been paired with Duke, the eldest son of a knightly family. Duke was a student who mainly fought by using body enhancement magic. In the original story, Weiss had not been paired with Duke. It was probably connected to the changes in their grades. Weiss had no idea what criteria were used to determine the pairs. However, in a survival situation where stamina mattered the most, Duke, whom Weiss considered a musclehead, was practically a jackpot. Duke then stopped Weiss and asked him to wait for a moment. In his view, they should already take a break since he had not eaten anything all day. The training was set to last for 3 days, and aside from clothing, securing food and shelter was also part of the test. He could not understand why they were hunting monsters so aggressively and wondered if they had the order of priorities backwards. In response, Weiss firmly declared that they would not be eating. This left Duke confused. Weiss then stated that they would spend the next 3 days hunting monsters without sleep or rest. Hearing those words caused Duke to grow furious. Weiss urged Duke to listen carefully and explained that weaker monsters were usually more cautious. He pointed out that the forest was already crowded with a large number of lower-ranked students. According to Weiss, as time passed, the weaker creatures would disappear and only the tougher monsters would remain. Because of that, he insisted that they should focus on earning points while they still could. After finishing his explanation, he asked Duke whether he still intended to rest. However, Weiss realized in his mind that he had gone too far. Everything he had just explained was nothing more than an excuse he had made up on the spot. At that moment, earning points was not important. Even if Duke possessed monstrous stamina, there was no advantage in wandering around in the cold without eating. Even so, Weiss believed that he could not afford to rest. Although he felt sorry for Duke, he knew that Duke would have to go along with this as well. Weiss was determined to find Shirley as quickly as possible, no matter what. Even then, he doubted that his explanation had truly convinced Duke, and he found himself wondering whether he should reveal the real reason after all. Duke fell silent for a moment before suddenly coming to a realization and wondering if Weiss might actually be a genius. Pleased by Weiss' explanation, he quickly accepted it and eagerly pushed forward. With renewed determination, he focused on moving quickly, believing that the longer they delayed, the fewer weak monsters would remain for them to catch. Watching Duke's cheerful expression, Weiss could not help but wonder what was wrong with him. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Shirley and Lilith were resting inside a cave. Lilith checked with Shirley about the situation outside, and Shirley confirmed that nothing had changed. Because of the snow, it still did not look like they would be able to move. Lilith then offered Shirley some water after melting fresh snow and warming it up. She made sure that Shirley would not drink too much, warning that it could upset her stomach, and reminded her to be careful. Shirley accepted it with gratitude. As she rested, Shirley thought about Lilith Scarlet, the maid serving the infamous Weiss Vincent. Shirley had expected someone unpleasant, but what she had discovered was a woman with polite manners and a good demeanor. More than anything else, what surprised Shirley the most was Lilith's strength. Even though moving through the snow made it difficult to keep one's footing, Lilith treated it as if it were nothing and continued defeating monsters with frightening speed. Shirley found it truly impressive. Lilith then turned the praise toward Shirley, believing that her magic was amazing. The reason they were able to spend their time safely even now was thanks to Shirley's magic threads. Shirley understood that monsters had very poor ability to sense magic compared to humans, which made her traps extremely effective. The creatures simply walked into them on their own. Since she specialized more as a rearguard, she felt relieved that she had been teamed up with a vanguard fighter like Lilith. After some time, Shirley realized that the effects of the trap were about to wear off. Deciding that it was time to set them up again, she headed out of the cave by herself. However, several monsters were lurking nearby. The moment they spotted Shirley, the wolf-like creatures immediately rushed toward her. Before anything could happen, Lilith moved after Shirley and stayed by her side, unwilling to let her go alone because of the danger. Seeing that, the monster wolves abandoned their approach. Realizing that Lilith was right, Shirley felt apologetic. At the same time, she found Lilith's nearly silent footsteps somewhat unsettling, as they were so quiet that they almost felt frightening. A memory from Shirley's life surfaced in her mind. The nobles recognized her as the daughter of the Elias family, and everyone always regarded her as someone worthy of the Elias name. Ever since she was young, no one had ever called her simply by the name Shirley. There had once been a time when Shirley was kidnapped and taken to a house. The men holding her captive talked among themselves about how she was worth 10 million pel. Another man remarked that such a value was only expected from a noble. They even considered her fortunate for being born into the Elias family. Outside the house, a young Alan was making his way toward the building. From within, sounds could be heard as the man guarding the entrance was beaten by a mere child. Alan then entered the room, and Shirley witnessed him defeating the kidnappers who desperately pleaded before him. She was left astonished by what had happened, as he had completely dealt with every one of them. Afterward, Alan introduced himself and revealed that he had come to rescue her. For Shirley, the time that had seemed frozen finally began to move again from that day onward. It was the first time that Alan and Shirley met. Alan was a commoner who had been raised in an orphanage, and his dream was to create a world where everyone was equal. Shirley understood how impossible such an idea sounded. A society without nobles, commoners, or slaves, and without differences in status, seemed unrealistic. Even so, Alan was fully aware of how idealistic his beliefs were. To him, however, they were not merely empty words. He intended to prove them through his actions. At one point, a knight approached Alan and regarded him as a stubborn brat. The man was Zevis Aldine, the captain of the Royal Knights. Alan then earnestly sought Zevis' guidance and began his training under the knight captain. Shirley remembered that, when she was young, she had longed for a world of equality just as Alan had. Unlike him, however, she had never been able to express those feelings through her actions. Deep inside, she wanted to become someone like him. Before she even realized it, she had fallen in love with him. After that, Alan, Shirley, and the person who somehow ended up accompanying them decided to enroll in Noblesse Magic Academy. It was meant to be the first step toward achieving their goal. However, Alan was easily beaten and completely overwhelmed. The person they encountered there was the infamous Weiss Vincent, a man whose name was known by everyone. With little effort, and relying on his talent and power, Weiss acted however he pleased. During the entrance examinations, he unnecessarily beat Alan. Shirley had no idea what kind of underhanded methods Weiss had used, but despite that, he completely secured the top position in the rankings. There were even rumors that during the tag exam, Weiss had used Carta as a shield and ambushed the upperclassmen. Alan could not believe the rumors. Although he admitted that he and Weiss did not get along, he recognized that Weiss' strength was something earned through hard work. Because of that, Alan believed there was no way Weiss would resort to dirty tricks. From Alan's perspective, Weiss possessed conviction. Having personally fought him, Alan felt certain of that. However, Shirley could not agree. In her eyes, Alan simply did not understand the ugliness hidden within the nobility. Cruel treatment of slaves and even the elimination of political enemies were everyday occurrences among nobles. They acted with righteousness on the surface, yet they would still resort to underhanded methods whenever necessary. Shirley knew that was the true nature of nobles. Having grown up in such an environment, she had come to dream of an equal society where nobles no longer existed. Because of that, she found it difficult to believe that someone like Weiss, surrounded by countless bad rumors, had never done anything wrong. Shirley even used Carta as an example. Seeing how terrified Carta was, she believed that Weiss must have put her through something terrible. Irritated just by thinking about Weiss, Shirley considered him the lowest of the low and absolutely the worst. While lost in those thoughts, someone knocked on her door and called for her. It was the day before the survival training, and for some reason, Weiss had come to visit her room. He had come to talk about the training scheduled for the next day, and he wanted her to withdraw from it. Shirley remembered that Weiss had already brought up the same matter earlier that day, leaving her unable to understand why he kept insisting on it. Weiss' reason was that the training was dangerous. Having seen her abilities, he believed that she would not be able to handle it. To Shirley, the situation felt strange. Weiss appeared to be worried about her, yet they had barely spoken to each other. Even so, Shirley had no intention of withdrawing, no matter who asked her to do so. Weiss continued pressing the matter in an almost playful manner, wondering whether it would really be impossible even if he personally asked. In response, Shirley shut the door right in front of him. Standing outside, Weiss noticed that Shirley still had some pots left to use. Realizing that nothing more would come from the conversation, he decided there was no point in continuing it any further. None of it made sense to Shirley. She had no desire to speak with him anymore, and she could not understand why Weiss acted as though he was concerned about her. To her, it seemed like an attempt to lower her guard. She began to suspect that Weiss was planning to deal with his rivals in that manner. In Shirley's mind, that had to be the answer. The reason Weiss continued to stay firmly in first place must have been because he had repeated tricks like that over and over again. In Shirley's mind, the two girls around Weiss were no different. As for Cynthia, Shirley believed that she was probably being blackmailed into becoming Weiss' fiancée. In Lilith's case, Shirley assumed that she was being forced to serve him as a maid. As if sensing those thoughts, Lilith suddenly grabbed Shirley and lifted her up. She understood that there were things Shirley simply could not bring herself to say openly. Shirley quickly denied it, only for Lilith to firmly express how wonderful Lord Weiss was. Lilith made it clear that she was serving him by her own choice and that she was not being used for anyone else's convenience. As Lilith stared directly into her eyes, Shirley could only accept her words. From the look in Lilith's eyes, Shirley could clearly see just how deeply Lilith admired Weiss. Before long, the exercise had already reached its third day. During that time, Shirley had grown much closer to Lilith, and the two of them could now talk about many different things. However, Shirley had accidentally stepped on one of Lilith's emotional landmines. Even so, by the third day, they were steadily earning points. Shirley set traps, cast protective magic on Lilith, and together they safely defeated monsters. Part of it was because they worked well together in combat, but more than anything, Shirley felt at ease because Lilith did not treat her like a noble. Still, because of her own words, Shirley had ended up making Lilith angry. Because of that, she began to wonder whether the terrible rumors surrounding Weiss might actually be false. After checking her finger, Shirley realized that one of her traps had been triggered and needed to be reset. Meanwhile, Lilith was sleeping soundly. She had not been able to sleep at all during the blizzard, so Shirley did not find it surprising. Believing that it would be better not to wake her, Shirley decided to go by herself. Things still felt somewhat awkward after the previous night, but she believed that everything would be fine as long as she returned quickly. As she moved ahead, Shirley suddenly came across a monster. Moments later, even more monsters appeared, surrounding her from every direction. From the sight before her, it seemed that Shirley had no way to escape. Then all of the monsters attacked at once. It appeared that Lilith, whose arms had been bitten, was trying to protect Shirley. She lifted one of the monsters, grabbed her dagger, and stabbed it. Then another wolf lunged from behind Lilith, but Shirley stepped forward and struck it with her sword. However, they were still being overwhelmed and surrounded. Shirley blamed herself and apologized to Lilith because she had gone to set the traps alone. Lilith assured her that there was no need to apologize. At that moment, their only priority was bringing the monsters down. Lilith noticed that there were dozens of demon wolves. She realized that since 3 or 4 had not been enough, the monsters must have called the rest of their pack. There were far more creatures than the number she had sensed 2 days earlier. On top of that, Shirley noticed how strong they were. The demon wolves were clearly different from the enemies they had faced so far. Their magical power was overwhelming. Even so, Shirley noticed that Lilith was steadily reducing their numbers. As expected, Lilith was amazing, and Shirley became confident that they could win if things continued at that pace. But then the alpha let out a howl, catching both Shirley's and Lilith's attention. Moments later, a pack of dark wolves appeared behind the alpha. Shirley was shocked when even more demon wolves appeared. Realizing the danger, Lilith urged her to run. If they were surrounded by that many monsters in the forest, there would be no escape. She pressed Shirley to move quickly. However, one dark wolf managed to reach Shirley and bit her shoulder, while several others leaped at her. Fortunately, they only caught her jacket, allowing her to break free and escape. Shirley quickly cast her magic threads, preventing the dark wolves from reaching them. She believed that this would buy them a little time, and Lilith acknowledged her effort. Together, they continued fleeing from the dark wolves. As they ran, Shirley became aware that she was losing too much blood. She suspected that the creature's saliva contained something that prevented blood from clotting. Later, they finally stopped when they found themselves standing at the edge of a cliff. Shirley's vision was becoming blurry, and her steps were growing unsteady. In the depths of her mind, thoughts of death briefly flashed through her consciousness. Shirley heard Lilith's firm determination that she would not lose and would not die. At that moment, Shirley realized that she was right. She could not give up. She still had a goal of creating a world of equality. She still had to graduate from the academy. Strengthening her resolve, Shirley also decided that she must not die, no matter what. Before the demon wolves could get any closer, a familiar skill began to take shape. It was Weiss, who had arrived and used Dark Heal. In an instant, Lilith and Shirley were healed, while the dark wolves suffered damage. Shirley noticed that her wounds had disappeared. Then she saw Weiss approaching them. Lilith was delighted by his arrival. Weiss instructed both Lilith and Shirley to crouch where they were. As the dark wolves continued to close in, Weiss cut them down one after another, refusing to be overwhelmed by their numbers. Shirley wondered why Weiss had come. Meanwhile, one of the dark wolves managed to slip to the side, but before it could attack Shirley, Duke came crashing down on it and slammed it into the ground. Shirley was surprised to see Duke, and he acknowledged her presence. Weiss took charge of the front while Duke covered the rear, and Duke accepted the role without hesitation. As usual, Weiss fought the demon wolves with his sword, while Duke relied on his bare hands. Later on, they succeeded in wiping out the demon wolves. Weiss remarked that there had certainly been a lot of them. Duke shared the same thought. Complaining about the situation, Duke noted that he had not slept at all and was still fighting, and he wanted Weiss to let him rest. Shirley looked at Duke, her childhood friend. He was the kind of person who could get along with anyone. Yet he never opened his heart to people he truly disliked. Seeing someone like Duke place that much trust in Weiss was something Shirley could hardly believe. Lilith reminded Shirley, just as she had before, that Lord Weiss was a wonderful person. She then wondered whether Duke would freeze to death if they allowed him to sleep there. Weiss figured that since it was Duke, he would probably be fine. Watching from a distance, Cynthia wondered if the person she was seeing was perhaps Weiss. After hearing a loud noise, she had come to investigate. From what she could tell, they had been fighting a pack of demonic wolves. To her, it was unfortunate because it seemed that she had arrived a little too late. Judging from the scene before her, everything had already been settled. However, something caught her attention. Among the demonic wolves, there was one in particular. Unlike the others, that single body was not disintegrating. Shirley told herself that she had to tell Weiss. Not long after, she approached him, and when he asked why, she thanked him for saving her and for everything he had done up until now. She also apologized. However, one of the demon wolves nearby woke up. The demon wolves then charged at Shirley, pushing her until she lost her footing and fell off the cliff. Weiss cried out her name. Reacting without hesitation, he jumped off the cliff after her. Reaching out, he managed to grab her hands, and with all his strength, he pulled and threw her back toward the cliff. Shirley landed safely on Duke. Meanwhile, Lilith cried out for Weiss. Lilith then turned her attention to the demonic wolf. Just as the beast lunged at her, it was suddenly impaled. Cynthia had revealed herself. She announced that it was too late, as Weiss had already fallen down the cliff. There was nothing the others could do to help him. Shirley blamed herself for what had happened, but then Alan rushed toward the cliff and leaped down after Weiss. Determined to save him, he followed after him without hesitation. Far below the cliff, Weiss wondered if he had already died. He questioned why he had saved Shirley. He had risked his life and wandered through the snowy mountains for 3 days. To him, none of it made any sense. His only goal had always been to avoid his own downfall. There had been no reason to save her, and yet the event where Shirley died was something Weiss wanted to erase, no matter what. When Shirley had died in the original story, Weiss had cried, despite knowing that it was only fiction. Although some people on the internet had left hateful comments about Shirley, Weiss had never viewed her that way. It was Shirley's desperate efforts to catch up to Alan and her determination to give everything she had that had inspired Weiss and given him courage. To him, it was simply too cruel for someone like Shirley to be given nothing but a tragic dead end. That was why Weiss wanted to shatter that particular fate, no matter what. Then Alan called out to Weiss. Weiss quickly got to his feet, only to find Alan greeting him with a good morning. Surprised, Weiss could hardly believe that Alan was actually alive and standing before him. After some time, the two of them sat beside a fire. Weiss could not help but ask Alan what had happened. Alan explained that he had seen Weiss falling and had jumped after him. There had been a river below, and both of them had been swept away by the current. By the time he regained consciousness, they had already ended up there. Weiss was not convinced and told Alan not to give him that explanation. Even if there had been a river below, a fall like that should have been fatal. But then Weiss paused. He suddenly realized that, somehow, they had miraculously survived that kind of fall before. Then Weiss asked when Alan had learned that. Alan responded with a question of his own, asking what Weiss was referring to. Weiss refused to let him act ignorant and pointed out that Alan had used flight magic. In Weiss's view, surviving a fall like that should have been impossible unless flight magic had been used to control their speed. Because of that, he questioned how someone like Alan could even use such magic. Wanting a clear explanation, Weiss pressed him for an exact answer about how he had saved him and urged him to respond. At that moment, Weiss recalled that according to the lore of the original game, Alan was not even supposed to be capable of using magic. That made him wonder if Alan had been hiding something all along. However, Alan answered that it did not really matter at the moment. Instead, he turned the question around and suggested that what mattered more was what Weiss himself had been hiding. Weiss was confused by what Alan meant by hiding something. In his eyes, if anyone was concealing something, it should have been Alan. Alan then brought up what had happened the day before the training exercise. Shirley had told him that Weiss had gone to her room and demanded that she withdraw. According to what Shirley had shared, she felt as though Weiss had been trying to pressure her into dropping out so he could keep all the evaluation points for himself. In his mind, Weiss thought that Shirley had wasted absolutely no time spreading rumors. At the same time, he admitted to himself that he was at fault for visiting a girl's room so late at night. Looking back on it, he believed that he had probably frightened her. Alan admitted that he honestly could not picture Weiss doing something so underhanded. He then brought up another question and wondered if Weiss had already known that Shirley's life was going to be in danger. The question caught Weiss off guard, but he quickly denied it. Instead, he insisted that things were exactly as Shirley had described. In his own explanation, Shirley had simply been getting in the way of his score, so he had pressured her. Alan accepted that answer. Then, returning to their earlier discussion, he stated that he had nothing to hide either. According to him, the two of them had simply fallen into the river and been swept away. Faced with that response, Weiss found himself unable to say anything further. Quietly, Weiss observed Alan. Although he acted completely unaware of everything, he was surprisingly calculating. In Weiss's mind, Alan remained as frustratingly hard to like as ever. Yet strangely enough, Weiss felt no irritation toward him at that moment. As they shared some food, Weiss expressed his gratitude to Alan. Meanwhile, deep within the cave, a monster rested inside its lair. It was a dragon, and it had just awakened.